Honestly, I don't care whether you believe this or not. The whole situation sounds insane even to me. I don't blame anyone who says it's nonsense. Maybe I wouldn't believe it either. I'm not trying to make myself look better, but I'm also not going to reveal anything that could expose my identity. Part 1. My parents told my brother to take my house because I don't have a family. I'm in my early 30s, single, and childless. My brother is 29 and already has 4 kids. Their first child was born when he was 22, the second a year later, the third 2 years after that, and the fourth arrived just a couple of months ago. I've never gotten along with his wife. She constantly behaves arrogantly and tries to provoke me, and the moment I react even slightly, she immediately plays the victim. She can start crying on command and put on a whole performance to win sympathy. My parents and brother adore her, even though they know exactly what she's like. They simply don't care. I'll admit she's a beautiful woman, but her personality is so unbearable that I can never be attracted to her. She also refuses to work, despite having a college degree. My mother joyfully babysits the kids all day, so their entire household depends financially on my brother. They also can't afford to live anywhere except my parents' home, and that house already barely fits everyone. 4 kids and 4 adults living under one roof in a small 3-bedroom house built in the 1960s. Growing up, my younger brother was clearly the favorite. We're 3 years apart, but he quickly developed a superiority complex because I was always punished whenever I reacted to his behavior. It was obvious my parents cared more about him. He got everything he wanted, unless someone outside the family called my parents out on it, and that happened often enough that my parents eventually moved us 240 kilometers away from the rest of the family just to avoid criticism. We only saw relatives during holidays because the drive was 3 hours long. My brother used physical force against me several times. He constantly flirted with my first girlfriend until she broke up with me, and he mocked every mistake I ever made. My parents would just tell me to ignore it whenever I got upset. The only time they treated us equally was when they were trying to keep up appearances in front of other people during holidays. It was almost funny watching their faces when they had to pretend everything was fine. We had relatives who loved to gossip, so my parents threatened to take away my belongings if I ever told anyone what actually went on in our home. When I turned 18 and moved out, my parents practically celebrated because they no longer had to support me. I hadn't even finished school yet, but living on other people's couches was still better than living with them. I kept minimal contact afterward. They didn't even show up for my high school graduation. But honestly, I didn't care anymore. I only saw my parents and brother during holidays. Then the pandemic started in 2020, and things got rough. I lost my job and couldn't renew my lease. My roommate also lost his job, so we couldn't keep the apartment on unemployment benefits. I loved that place, but when the lease expired, he moved back to his relatives, and I had to sell almost all of my belongings because I was close to homelessness. I shouldn't have been paying for such an expensive apartment, but I like living comfortably, until life taught me otherwise. I realized I should have lived somewhere cheaper and saved money for emergencies. But I had a plan. I owned a pickup truck and bought a camper for $1,000 in decent condition. I installed it on the truck so I could live in it temporarily. That temporary solution ended up lasting much longer than expected. I hoped to stay on my parents' property, where my brother and his family also lived. But when I asked my parents if I could park my camper there for a while, they said their house was already too crowded and they didn't want me there. We hadn't been close for 10 years anyway. They told me they'd agree only if I paid them the same amount as renting an apartment in their area. Way too much just to park a truck outside. I was unemployed and trying to save every dollar from unemployment benefits. For that price, I could have rented an actual apartment. My parents said the camper was an eyesore and told me to leave if I wouldn't pay. My sister-in-law thought it was hilarious that I had to live in a camper, and my brother joined her, pointing at me, calling me a homeless drifter. That first night, I parked in a store's parking lot. I was terrified someone might try to break in. I barely slept. I had nowhere to go. Relatives with property lived far away, friends were all in apartments, and I didn't want to leave the area. I also needed a stable place to receive mail. Finding consistent parking spots was hard. I searched months for a job similar to my previous one. Meanwhile, I dealt with all kinds of problems. Panhandlers, drug users, random people telling me to leave because my camper ruined their view, and even a man claiming to be from an HOA who demanded I leave despite not being anywhere near their neighborhood. He became aggressive, so I left to avoid trouble. I used extension cords to plug into random outdoor outlets whenever I could. Not the best thing to do, but I needed my fridge to work. I had a small solar panel for my phone, but no generator. Too loud and expensive. After months of this, I finally found a job. I had to move to a neighboring town and accept work that had nothing to do with retail. I'd sworn never to return to retail after college, and I was close to breaking that promise more than once. I still received unemployment benefits, but I had nowhere to live and nothing to do except read, watch DVDs, use my phone or laptop, and track which public restrooms I could use. When I finally got hired, I practically lived at the workplace. Behind the warehouse, there were old employee parking spots no one used because they were too far from the building. My manager, the owner of the company, didn't mind me staying there. He even liked the arrangement because I was available for any shift. He allowed me to remove the camper from the truck and keep it in one of the unused parking spots so I could drive the truck freely.
I'm still not sure if what I did back then was legal, but nobody questioned it, so I said nothing. I was practically on standby at all times. Whenever the workplace needed help, I showed up, and I worked almost every single day. My boss allowed me to connect my camper to the building's electricity and water. In exchange, I came in every Sunday and worked for free when the place was empty, except for the janitor and the security guard. I usually showered at a friend's apartment or at the local gym, since the camper didn't have one. I only had a portable chemical toilet, but I tried to avoid using it because cleaning it was awful. Whenever possible, I used public restrooms, and I also had a key to the warehouse, so I could use the bathroom there anytime. The night security guard eventually became one of my closest friends. Heating the camper in winter was easy with a small electric heater. Summer, however, was unbearable, so I bought a used portable AC unit just to survive the heat. I made a lot of money through overtime and learned a ton from my coworkers. By mid-year, I earned a promotion. I became a supervisor and finally started making real money. That's when I decided I wanted a house. The fear I felt when I couldn't afford rent made me realize I needed something stable, long-term. I found a single-story house with 3 bedrooms, just 3 kilometers from work, with a small yard. I even negotiated the price down by $10,000. I poured almost all of my savings into the down payment and got approved for a mortgage. Finally, I didn't have to live in a camper anymore. There was enough space in the backyard to park my pickup truck and remove the camper from it, so I set it aside in case I ever needed it again. Once I fully settled into the house, I made a stupid mistake. I posted about it on social media. My parents saw the post, and that's when everything started spiraling. A few weeks later, my parents, my brother, and his wife showed up at my doorstep unannounced, demanding a tour of the house. I hadn't even given them the address. To this day, I don't know how they found it. None of my friends admitted telling them. My best guess? They followed me from work. And honestly, that wouldn't surprise me. The moment I opened the door, they barged in like loud tourists. They walked around the house as if they owned the place. My sister-in-law kept giving me smug little looks, and only later I understood why. It irritated me more than I can describe. My parents kept repeating how much space I had and how unnecessary it was for a lonely man without a wife or kids. Sure, I'm single now, but that doesn't mean it will always be that way. My brother kept commenting that my house was bigger than our parents and much closer to his workplace. Eventually, he asked to talk privately. Everyone else conveniently stepped outside to the terrace. That's when I realized something was definitely going on. My brother, let's call him Dan, told me the house was too big for one person and I should let him and his family move in because his wife was pregnant with their 4th child and my home was closer to his job. He pointed out that I had a camper, so I could just live outside in the yard while they took the house. He never once mentioned paying rent. Let me make it clear. He has a good job. He simply believed he deserved my house more than I did.
He even started listing the rules I would have to follow, like not entering the house without giving them notice and a curfew. If he weren't my brother, I would have thought he had lost his mind. But honestly, Dan stopped living in reality years ago because our parents spoiled him to the point of delusion. I tried to argue, but he constantly interrupted me, acting like I didn't have a right to speak. I had no intention of renting to him, or anyone like him. I've read stories like this online, but never imagined I'd be living one of them. Yet here I was, dealing with narcissistic lunatics straight out of those posts. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Dan didn't even notice. He just kept waving his hands around and explaining why he needed the house more than I did. Then he tried to shake my hand as if we had already reached an agreement. That's when I finally snapped. I said no, loud enough for him to flinch. I rarely raised my voice growing up because I got punished for it, but this was my home, not theirs. I stood up and told him the house wasn't for rent, and the fact that he thought he could move in just because our parents wanted it meant nothing to me. I bought this house myself, and it wasn't my fault he kept having more kids while still living with our parents. Dan stepped close, not touching me, but inches away, and told me I didn't deserve the house and his family needed it more. I laughed in his face. I earned this home through hard work. Of course I deserved it. He started shouting that I didn't have a wife or kids and didn't need all this space, so I should let him have it. I told him I wouldn't give him anything. And again, he never offered to pay rent. If I agreed, I'd still be paying the mortgage while having nowhere to live. Then came his final argument. He didn't have to pay because we were family, and our parents said I should give him the house. I yelled back that their word wasn't law and they had zero authority over my property. And right on cue, my parents and sister-in-law stormed back inside. They surrounded me and tried to pressure me into agreeing. They were shouting from all sides. The phrase, "Do this for Dan," was repeated dozens of times. I told them they had no right to interfere in my life and ordered them to leave before I called the police. My sister-in-law started yelling that she was pregnant and I couldn't treat her this way. I told her I never promised her anything, that she had no right to take anything from me, and that I wasn't responsible for her or her kids. I also told her she was an arrogant jerk who never respected me, and that I didn't care how many children she had, she wasn't living in my house. She got so furious, she attacked me. She punched me in the face once and tried to hit again, but Dan held her back while she screamed that she wanted to claw my eyes out. I raised my phone, still recording, and told them I'd call the police if they didn't leave immediately. Slowly, my parents told Dan they were leaving. As they walked out, my mother said, "I had 1 week to come to my senses." I told her I never would. Before leaving, I warned my sister-in-law that I had video of everything and would file a police report if she tried anything. She screamed, covered her face, and ran out crying. My mother was the last to leave, repeating again that I had to do this for Dan. I told her it would never happen. Part 2. How they tried to steal my house when I wasn't home. After throwing them out, I immediately posted the whole story online for my extended family to see. I knew my parents' next move would be trying to twist the story to make me look like the villain. I had about 1 hour to get ahead of them, and I had video evidence. My plan worked. A few relatives supported me instantly. My parents, Dan, and his wife must have been preparing their own version, but it was too late. The truth was already out. They had a few sympathizers, but most relatives already knew how entitled they were. One unknown relative even called me, screaming that I was a terrible brother and needed to give the house to a real family. I hung up and blocked the number. A week later, my parents and Dan returned just like they promised. They rang the doorbell nonstop and pounded on the door. When I cracked it open, they tried to force their way inside, but I had installed door chains. My mother, in her fake sweet tone, asked if I was ready to let Dan move in. I told them all to get lost and never come back. She burst into dramatic tears and asked why I couldn't do this for my loving brother. I laughed and told her I didn't love him because he treated me like garbage for years, and they had always encouraged it. They left except for my mother's loud crying and the angry stares from the others. If anyone think it was suspiciously easy to get rid of them, it wasn't. I just didn't realize they had another plan. Because that Friday, when I came home from work, Dan's moving truck and minivan were parked in my driveway. His entire family was unloading their belongings. When he saw me, he smiled and waved like an idiot. My sister-in-law proudly announced that whether I liked it or not, they were moving in, because Mommy said it's okay and I always have to listen to Mommy.
I was boiling with rage when I heard those words, watching her smug expression. I locked myself in my truck and immediately called the police. Once they realized what I was doing, my sister-in-law started pounding on the window, yelling at me to stop and insisting I couldn't do this to her because she and Dan needed that house. She screamed, "Why can't you do this for Dan?" I snapped back, "To hell with him. This is my damn house, not his." Then she threatened to scratch my truck if I didn't hang up on the police. The dispatcher heard everything because my window was slightly open. I warned her that if she damaged my truck, I'd sue her. Thankfully, she was smart enough to back off. When the police arrived, Dan and his wife had locked themselves and their kids inside my home. I explained the situation and showed the officers my ID with the current address. When we reached the front door, I saw they had changed the locks. The old lock, with the core punched out, was lying on the porch, and right next to it, the drill they used with a full set of bits. They couldn't have made it more obvious. I pointed out the broken lock and the drill, then explained everything leading up to this moment. Dan must have called my parents after I got home because they showed up while I was talking to the police. Immediately, they started lying, claiming I had agreed to rent the house to Dan and his family. I said that was a complete lie, and I could prove it. That's when Dan and his wife finally came out holding some papers, looking ridiculously confident, like they had outsmarted me. They had actually drafted and printed a fake lease agreement with a forged signature. The signature didn't even look remotely like mine. I doubt either one of them had ever seen my real signature, so it was incredibly stupid. I told my parents and Dan that this was blatant fraud, and that if the police investigated, they'd figure it out in seconds. I also warned Dan that an arrest could cost him his job, leaving his family with no income. I added that I'd hire a lawyer and sue for damages if anything in my house was stolen or broken, and I'd call child services if necessary. Dan turned pale. My mother, however, stepped between us again, insisting that I should do this for Dan, and that I should move into my camper so he could finally have a real home. I yelled back that if she thought it was such a good idea, she could give Dan her house. I told the police I wanted everyone out immediately, or I'd press charges. Loudly, I listed every crime: breaking into my home, drilling out the lock, forging documents, faking my signature, and the video I had of my sister-in-law attacking me. I made it clear that these charges could destroy their lives if I decided to go through with them, and the only reason I hadn't yet was because of Dan's kids. That finally scared my parents. My mother gave up and whispered something to my sister-in-law, while my father pulled down aside. My sister-in-law suddenly broke into loud tears, ripping the fake lease into pieces like confetti. An officer told her to pick it all up, or he'd find her for littering. Dan told his kids to start carrying their things back to the truck. The kids cried, and the oldest boy sobbed because he wasn't going to get his own room after all. Dan and his wife tried one last time to guilt-trip me, gathering the kids around like some dramatic movie scene. All the kids looked at me with trembling lips. She kept rubbing her pregnant belly, trying to look pitiful, and Dan made the saddest face he could, saying, "Please don't do this. We need to live here." I didn't budge. I told them to keep packing. They cried louder. Dan yelled, accusing me of being selfish for refusing to help my family. I laughed and told him he didn't want to share, he wanted to take. And no amount of tears would change the fact that he was no longer my brother, just a selfish man who thought he could take whatever he wanted from me, just like when we were kids. The police warned Dan to calm down or they'd cuff him on the spot. I asked the officers to stay until everyone left,
and they said they weren't going anywhere until it was resolved. A few minutes later, 2 more officers arrived, which made my parents hurry even faster. I forced Dan to hand me the keys to the new lock he installed. He hurled them toward a storm drain instead of giving them to me. An officer ordered him to retrieve them, so he had to remove the grate and get filthy climbing down to reach the keys. He grumbled and then threw them in my hand. I told them all to leave and never come back. My mother said she would disown me, and I answered with exaggerated sarcasm, pretending to be devastated about not attending the family gatherings where I was always treated like garbage because Dan was their golden child. My parents looked stunned, and even the police seemed disgusted by them. My mother broke down crying and walked off. My father stared at me like he wanted to hit me, and Dan silently held his kids, accepting defeat. Meanwhile, my sister-in-law threw a tantrum on my lawn. They eventually formed a line and passed boxes out of my house. Nothing had been unpacked yet, so they were done quickly. The whole time, my mother kept repeating that it was too late and that I could still do this for Dan. Trying to bargain in increasingly desperate ways, she offered to have Dan pay me rent. When that failed, she suggested I move back in with them and let Dan rent my house so we wouldn't have to live together. I told her to shut up and keep loading the truck. I didn't want Dan in my house, didn't want his money, and definitely didn't want to live with my parents again after the way they treated me growing up. Any deal with them would be a deal with the devil. My sister-in-law threw another fit when she heard that, dropped the box, and sat in the yard sobbing because she didn't want to move back into my parents' home. Eventually, everything was loaded, and before they left, I finally told my parents exactly what their behavior had done to me growing up. With 4 officers watching, they couldn't interrupt or walk away. For the first time in my life, I said everything. How they let Dan and his wife mock me, call me a bum, how they refused to let me park my camper on their property when I was homeless and trying to get back on my feet. They wanted to throw me out of my own home so Dan could live there for free. Yet when I had nowhere to go, they wanted to charge me money just to park on their driveway, even though they knew I'd lost my job. The officers looked at them with open disgust. I asked them what I ever did besides being born to deserve such treatment. When I finally achieved something in life, they tried to take it away for their favorite child. I told them I owed them nothing and would never ask for anything again. They had no answers. They just stood there like stunned fish. My father turned red from embarrassment, and my mother cried, saying she was a terrible person. I told her she was right.
They were all the same, and I'm certain they'll eventually answer for it. They were awful people, and deep down, they knew it. But if I had confronted them without witnesses, they would have simply gotten angry and doubled down on blaming me. They'd been in denial for so long that it practically became part of who they were. My mother hid her face against my father's shoulder and cried, while my father looked defeated. Dan and his family avoided me while they finished loading their things into the truck. I made sure none of my belongings were missing, not that I had much furniture at the time. I was lucky to even have a couch. They eventually returned to their vehicles. My sister-in-law kept staring at me with pure hatred until Dan finally forced her into the minivan and drove away. Once they were gone, I went online and wrote about everything that had happened. My parents were too embarrassed to defend themselves this time. Our family had already been somewhat divided before, but now the balance shifted completely in my favor. Nearly all of my relatives supported me, and the few who didn't simply stayed neutral. No matter how many times my parents repeated, "We did it for Dan," no one cared anymore. Even relatives whom I never expected to stand with me took my side, including people who used to defend my parents. I even invited about half of the family to spend Christmas Eve at my new home. I didn't invite my parents. Surprisingly, Dan and his wife didn't block me on social media. Because of that, I learned that in early November, my sister-in-law gave birth to their 4th child. They were still living with my parents. I'm almost sure they knew I was checking their pages,
because every couple of weeks my sister-in-law posted passive-aggressive complaints about how cramped my parents' house was, clearly trying to guilt-trip me. I'm sure it was driving my parents insane. They couldn't get any peace with 3 loud kids, an unstable daughter-in-law, and a newborn all under the same roof. Honestly, maybe they should have moved into a camper in their backyard and handed the entire house to Dan. They were always willing to sacrifice anything for him. Part 3. My parents, brother, and sister-in-law showed up at my home on Christmas Eve, even though they weren't invited. For everyone who said I needed cameras, I plan to install them once I can afford it. I'm still recovering financially after buying the house last year, and my old 3-year-old laptop can't handle a full security setup. A video doorbell will probably be the first thing I buy. As for those who insisted I should have had Dan and his wife arrested, the only reason I didn't was because they're parents. Their kids need them. If Dan had been arrested, he likely would have lost his job, and they would have had no income. And with a newborn, jail wasn't something I wanted for them. You don't need prison to get justice. The police helped enough without me filing charges. Would I show that level of mercy again? Probably not, and they know it. My sister-in-law kept posting her passive-aggressive online comments about me, especially after the baby was born. She said the same thing again and again in different words. She was tired of living with my parents, there wasn't enough space, she needed her own home, etc. As I mentioned, for Christmas Eve, I invited half the relatives. Everyone I invited came, even though some had to drive 3 or 4 hours. They told me they wanted to support me. Many praised me for the hard work it took to buy a house without anyone's help, and they were sorry for everything I'd been through. They asked why I hadn't just stayed with them instead of being practically homeless for so long. I admitted, a little embarrassed, that I was stubborn, attached to the area, and felt I had better job opportunities here. I also wanted to climb out of the mess on my own. They accepted that explanation. The party turned out to be the best we'd had in years. We listened to Christmas music, talked, laughed. For the first time in a long time, I felt genuinely happy. But I wouldn't be telling this story if it stayed that way. About 2 hours into the party, uninvited guests arrived. My parents, Dan, and my sister-in-law. They walked in with bright smiles, not even bothering to knock, as if my home still belonged to them. I turned off the music and told them to leave immediately. They begged to stay, claiming they brought gifts. Before I could answer, my uncle, my mother's brother, stood up and yelled at them. He told them they had no right to be in my home or my life after what they tried to do. Several relatives backed him up. This man used to adore my mother, but after learning the truth about how I'd been treated, his opinion changed completely. Then my grandparents, my mother's parents, stepped forward. Despite their age, they stood between us and told my parents that if they wanted to mend things with me, now was not the time. They said they had never been more disappointed in them. They told my parents that if they ever wanted to be part of my life again, they needed to start treating me like a son. Then they turned to Dan and his sister-in-law and said they were sick of seeing the constant complaints she posted online. They told her to drop it. My house was not going to become theirs. My sister-in-law burst into tears. She threw herself onto a chair, crying that it wasn't fair that I had a home while she had 4 kids and nowhere to go. She claimed she deserved this house more than I did and that her children needed more space. It was petty, but I told her loudly that she was a terrible mother. My mom was the one raising her children while she spent her days drinking, scrolling through her phone, and burning through Dan's paycheck. And on top of all that, she still dared to complain. I even joked that it was a miracle her newborn didn't get drunk from breast milk because of how much she drank. The room went silent. Everyone stared at me, and my sister-in-law demanded to know if I truly thought she was a bad mother. I said the facts spoke for themselves. If she wanted any chance of moving out someday, she needed to use her college degree, get a job, and learn how to manage money. My mother was already doing most of the child care. She'd have plenty of free time once the baby grew a bit older. Her oldest child, a 7-year-old, ran at me and started ticking me, yelling that I was a bad person because I didn't let them live in my house. Dan dragged him away, but the rest of the relatives immediately took my side again. They turned on my sister-in-law and Dan, criticizing them openly. Everyone was yelling, the baby was crying, all the kids were crying. Even Dan looked close to crying from the humiliation. He eventually sat down on the little bench near the entrance where I keep my shoes. He looked completely defeated, staring at the floor, unable to speak. If we'd been alone, I'm sure he'd tried again to demand my house like he did months ago. But not this time. Not with a room full of angry relatives watching him. His reputation was destroyed. Soon after that, my parents, Dan, and my sister-in-law left in total humiliation. The party continued. We avoided mentioning what had happened for the rest of the night. Everyone stayed over. I even let some relatives sleep in the camper so there'd be enough room. It actually made a surprisingly nice guest house, and they couldn't believe I had lived in it for nearly 2 years. I woke up early on Christmas morning, made coffee, and set out ibuprofen for anyone dealing with a hangover. People told me I was much better host than my parents had ever been. We all agreed to get together again next Christmas. After the holidays, my sister-in-law finally stopped posting passive-aggressive comments and even deleted the old ones. But right after New Year's, she posted again. She said she'd tried convincing my parents to buy a camper like mine so they could put it in the backyard for themselves and Dan's family could take over the entire house. My parents shut that idea down immediately, angrily, from what I heard. She deleted that post after a couple of days, and since then she's barely posted anything. I think she finally realized complaining wouldn't get her anywhere, and Dan can't afford to move out on his salary anytime soon. Honestly, I won't be surprised if they have another child in the next few years. Since that Christmas, everything has been quiet. My parents, Dan, and their wife are keeping their distance, acting as though I don't exist, just like they did before I bought the house. And honestly, I prefer it that way. But they'll eventually come back into my life somehow. I'm sure of it. And I can only imagine what stupid thing they'll try next.
Part 4. My parents and Dan came back into my life earlier than I expected, and this time they wanted money. I doubt this will surprise anyone who commented on my previous posts. My parents did exactly what people predicted. They wanted either my money or my signature. I expected the classic narcissistic lines about how I owed them something, or maybe some moral speeches about sharing wealth, but those were just fears in my imagination. Reality turned out a bit different. It all started when my parents recently contacted me through social media and asked to meet in a public place of my choosing. I immediately suspected something shady, but I wasn't scared. Honestly, I was amused. They knew better than to try manipulating me anymore, so I was curious what they wanted this time. I chose a local restaurant. Dan came with them, but barely spoke. After awkward greetings and ordering drinks, they got to the point. My parents begged me to help Dan rent an apartment so he could finally move out of their house. Apparently, Dan's credit history wasn't great. Shocking, I know. Maybe because his wife constantly burned through his money. Dan asked me either to give them financial help or to co-sign the lease and possibly help pay the rent. I refused both. That's when Dan snapped. He yelled that he needed my help and that I should sacrifice money for his family since I didn't have my own. I just laughed and asked where he and my parents were when I needed help. Right, they were laughing at me when I was living out of a camper. Or should I bring up our childhood? I was more than ready to go into detail in front of an entire restaurant. My mother grabbed my arm, begging me not to talk about that. My father and Dan simply looked away. I asked them if they seriously thought I was some kind of wealthy man. Their faces gave me the answer. When I told them I didn't have that kind of money, they were shocked. I explained how I saved up for the down payment on my house and how I practically lived at work just to scrape together enough. I'm still recovering financially. Yes, I have a little flexibility every month, but most of it goes into savings. I asked Dan what his annual income was. When he answered, I pointed out that it was actually a bit higher than mine. Then I explained how around 70% of my income goes toward the mortgage, insurance, gas, internet, phone,
food and other bills, leaving me with maybe 30% to save. I need emergency savings. My pickup truck is from the last decade. If it breaks down, I'll need money for repairs or a new vehicle. I need a fund for house repairs, doctors, taxes, lawyers, or any unexpected expense. So no, I can't give money to Dan. And I refuse to co-sign anything because I'd be responsible if he failed to pay, which is probably the same reason my parents refused to co-sign for him themselves. My mother burst into tears again, but I stayed ahead of their manipulation. I told them directly, I am not a bank. I am not an idiot. They needed to hear it. I expected my father to explode, like he always did whenever I disagreed with Dan, but he didn't. His face showed no anger, only regret and defeat. Maybe he regretted being a terrible parent. Maybe he regretted that he could no longer intimidate me. Who knows? Either way, they had no arguments left, and I wasn't giving them money. Dan stood up, said this was a waste of time, and started to leave. My mother apologized for him, but he walked out anyway. To kill them with kindness, I offered to pay for everyone's meal since we were already there. They couldn't refuse a free lunch, so they stayed. I avoided talking about money. Dan either ate silently, stared at his phone, or said nothing. My parents made small talk. They mentioned they had joined a local Christian church and had been attending for 2 weeks. I told them, good for you. Of course, they invited me to go as well. I simply said no thanks, and to their credit, they didn't push. When the meal was over, Dan left a $10 tip and walked out without saying a word. My mom apologized again, and then we all went our separate ways. That was it. Far less dramatic than expected. As for my former sister-in-law, she still complains about my parents online. She hates that she's not the queen of their house. Apparently, her toxicity is finally getting to my parents. She even wants my parents to move into a camper, like I had to, so her family could take over the whole house. They refuse every time. She seems to have a little fan base because occasionally some stranger messages me, angrily telling me I should have given my house to her. I don't argue anymore. I just block them. Although one persistent troll somehow got my phone number and used to call me from random numbers to say I should step aside for a real family man like Dan. I ignore them too. Lately the calls have been fading. Maybe they gave up. Part 5. My parents and my brother aren't doing well lately, though I'm fine. Ever since last Christmas, aside from the money request and one recent confrontation with my former sister-in-law, things have been quiet. I installed several cameras around my home, including a video doorbell. I didn't tell my family, just in case. So far, no one has tried to break in. I also rented out 2 rooms in my house, one to a close friend and the other to his buddy. They turned out to be great guys and great roommates, quiet, respectful, and they even set up small fridges in their rooms so they wouldn't clutter the main one. I offered rent so affordable they couldn't refuse. This significantly increased my monthly income. Even after taxes, I'm able to save much more because the rent covers a big chunk of my mortgage. How did my parents, Dan, and my former sister-in-law react to me renting rooms to friends? Badly. My father and Dan said nothing, but my former sister-in-law had a full meltdown. She exploded so aggressively that my mother came to me crying, saying I could have rented the rooms to Dan and his family. We argued. I pointed out that these were the same people who changed the locks on my house so they could move in without permission. You wouldn't want people like that living with you, so why would I? And my house wouldn't fit them anyway. It's a 3-bedroom home. I live in the master bedroom. That leaves 2 small rooms for Dan, his wife, and 4 kids. Even if I agreed to live with them, which I never would, there simply isn't enough space. And my mother knows I can't tolerate my former sister-in-law because she provokes me on purpose. They all mocked me when I was homeless, so why would I reward them with discounted rent? My current tenants are 2 single men in their 30s whom I get along with really well. My mother cried for a while, but eventually admitted she was just desperate. How did my parents find out I was renting the rooms? My former sister-in-law was stalking me online, saw something, told my parents, and then my mother came to me in tears. After that, they stopped bothering me about the house. Meanwhile, things got much worse in their household. My former sister-in-law turned out to be even worse than I imagined. I already knew she was manipulative and dramatic, but she fell even lower in my eyes when we learned that Dan's youngest child wasn't actually his. Yes, she cheated on him. Not exactly surprising in hindsight. Dan's parents kicked her out, Dan filed for divorce, and because our state still allows fault-based divorce, he won the case. He also successfully petitioned to have his name removed from the youngest child's birth certificate. After everything that happened, including the time they tried forcing me to hand over my house, their home life completely collapsed. And somehow, my former sister-in-law blamed me. She convinced herself that I was secretly rich, like I'd won the lottery or inherited money, and that I should have shared my wealth. According to her, she talked my parents and Dan into showing up at my Christmas party because she hoped they could get back on my good side. She also admitted it was her idea to ask me for money for an apartment. Her fantasies crashed when Dan and my parents told her the truth about my financial situation. And when my relatives confronted them at my Christmas party, it ruined my parents' reputation even more and finally made them stop listening to her. And, as I mentioned in the last post, my parents started going to church again. Maybe because last year I told them they were probably going to hell for the things they'd done. I'm not saying that's the real reason, but it was satisfying.
If only things were that simple. Even though my parents hadn't gone to church in over 20 years, they still came to my house, without my brother, to apologize in person after they read the first 3 parts of my story. Yes, they found them. They also know everything I've written here, and they're extremely upset about it. But reading a story about themselves turned out to be the only way for them to understand what kind of people they had actually been. I had never seen my father apologize to anyone like that. He's a terrible actor, so it felt genuine. My parents fully admitted everything they did to me and acknowledged that there was no excuse for it. They even called themselves narcissists and openly admitted that they hurt me deeply. Then they shifted the blame onto my sister-in-law. And while she definitely wasn't innocent, she wasn't the only one at fault. My parents had already been attending therapy for a while and suggested family counseling for all of us. I declined. I'm not ready for that emotionally. Dan never apologized to me, but whenever the past came up, he looked genuinely remorseful. Meanwhile, his marriage completely collapsed. His wife finally revealed her true nature to him and to my parents, and they realized she wasn't the person she pretended to be. But things only got worse. She kept trying new ways to get what she wanted. She constantly showed my parents listings of used RVs, trying to pressure them into buying one so they could move into it. That way, Dan and she could have the main house. She did this no matter how many times they asked her to stop. She even said my parents should just travel the country like normal retirees. Even for her, that was ridiculous. My parents suggested the opposite. She and Dan could buy an RV and live in it. She insisted that was impossible because she was a mother. When that didn't work, she actually took the baby and disappeared for several days. They knew she was fine because her phone stayed on, and she responded with short, passive-aggressive messages. When she returned, she was even angrier that no one gave in while she was gone. She refused to go to church, but Dan started going with my parents and brought his older kids with him, except for the baby, because she forbade him to take the infant anywhere. I personally don't go to church. I believe in God, but religion never helped me as a kid. Part 6. How Dan found out the truth about his wife. Most of this information came from Dan and my parents. I'm just retelling it. Back in March, Dan suddenly accused his wife of cheating. It shocked all of us because we thought he was completely under her control. Turns out, he wasn't. You all remember how he treated me whenever I stood up to him. Well, his wife didn't get off easy either. He finally pulled his head out of the sand and started connecting the dots.
He secretly ordered DNA tests for all his kids. 3 of them were his. The youngest wasn't. For reference, Dan and I have nearly identical straight, almost black hair, same as our parents. His wife's hair is also dark and straight, but the baby's hair was light and curly. Dan thought it would darken with age, but it never did. That was his biggest red flag. He confronted her with the DNA results in front of our parents. She burst into tears and insisted it was a lab mistake. She used every cliché: denial, half confessions, manipulation. But Dan didn't buy it. He dug far deeper than I ever expected. He had phone call logs, text messages, bank statements, the DNA test, everything. He even identified the man she had been cheating with, who likely fathered the baby because he had the same light curly hair. The evidence was bulletproof. Dan admitted she hid the affair so badly that uncovering it was easy. My parents demanded she leave their house immediately. She completely lost control, screaming, then becoming violent. My mom had to call the police. Yes, she was arrested. She scratched Dan and my father with her long fake nails, and even her older son got hit when he stepped in. Dan recorded everything on his phone, so the police had plenty of proof. Her parents had to bail her out. Then they returned for the baby, her things, and her car. A few days later, she showed up at my house. Apparently, she was next on her list. As soon as I opened the door, she started rambling, accusing me of writing everything online and calling me her enemy. I'm not sure, but she seemed high. Her eyes looked strange, and she behaved even more erratically than usual. She ranted about how mothers with young children are sacred, and how giving me my house would have kept her family together. When I tried to speak, she shoved me and tried to cover my mouth. She even raised her hand like she was about to scratch me. Obviously, that didn't go her way. I told her I'd call the police if she didn't get her hands off of me immediately. I also told her everything was recorded on my doorbell camera. She panicked instantly. Then I verbally tore her to pieces. I told her she had the nerve to call me selfish when she was the one cheating, refusing to work, draining Dan's money, expecting my mother to raise her children, and acting like my house belonged to her. I called her a top-tier narcissist and told her to stop blaming others for her own choices. That was enough. She ran back to her car, sped off, and disappeared. That was my breaking point. Now that she and Dan had separated, I went to the police and filed charges for the stalking and assault she committed last year. Her recent behavior at my doorstep was added to the case. I also gave the video to Dan for his divorce lawyer. Yes, I filed for a restraining order, and it was granted easily. She hasn't bothered me since. She stayed with her lover throughout the divorce. I didn't know what kind of person he was, but anyone who gets a married woman pregnant isn't someone with strong morals. During the divorce, she admitted Dan was not a real man anymore because he couldn't provide the lifestyle she wanted. She genuinely believed she was a trophy wife who deserved someone wealthy. Dan said he burst out laughing in her face. He told her she wasn't even close to attractive enough to be a trophy wife and pointed out all her faults. She was humiliated again, and now she had to move back in with her parents. They made her work in their family business because Dan cut off her access to his accounts. She had maxed out every credit card he gave her. She complained about having to work, but honestly, her parents were probably the only ones willing to hire her with her criminal record and 10-year-long employment gap. The divorce was messy, and she ended up with almost nothing since she cheated, physically attacked Dan and our father, and hurt her own child. The divorce was legally considered her fault, so she lost any chance of getting what she wanted. More details will come in the next part.
Part 7. What I know about my brother Dan's divorce. Dan's attorney did everything he could to speed up the divorce, but it cost my brother a lot.
I don't know the exact amount, only that it wasn't cheap. My former sister-in-law, on the other hand, ended up in a severe financial crisis, and as you know, a cornered animal always fights back. She tried, but the law was not on her side, just like her money, which was disappearing fast. Her parents had to pay for her lawyer, but he wasn't very good. To make things worse, she brought her lover to the divorce hearing so he could testify on her behalf. He was charismatic, smooth-talking, and tried to use that to his advantage. He claimed she had suffered because of an inadequate husband, which forced her to look for comfort in another man's arms. He even said he was willing to take responsibility for the baby, the same baby he fathered. He also argued that she needed alimony to support herself and the child, pointing out that Dan's name was still on the birth certificate, so financially it should be Dan's responsibility. According to Dan, the guy spoke well, but was an idiot. The judge wasn't impressed either. He called the lover a hypocrite for claiming he wanted to take responsibility for his child while simultaneously demanding money from the man whose marriage he ruined. Dan considered filing a lawsuit against the guy for intentional infliction of marital breakdown, something that's still legal in a few U.S. states. But he couldn't prove she ever truly loved him before the affair. And after everything we had seen, none of us were convinced she loved him at all. She used him as a source of income, nothing more. Many people guessed she probably kept having babies to avoid working, and honestly, they were probably right. She tried to stall the divorce, but neither the judge nor Dan's lawyer let her. All the evidence stacked against her made her attempts to play the victim completely useless. Eventually, she just dropped the act because there was nothing left to hide. The court had everything: recordings from Dan and me, police reports, photos, videos, all proving she was abusive, manipulative, and narcissistic. When the divorce was finalized, she agreed to a deal. Dan took responsibility for part of the credit card debt, and his name was removed from the baby's birth certificate. She was granted partial custody of the older kids, but no alimony and none of the massive debt she had racked up. Her new job at her parents' business meant she finally had an income, so she could begin paying off her own mess. She was allowed to see the kids almost any time, and even take them on weekends, but she barely tried. She took them out for cheap fast food a couple of times, but never kept them overnight. You'd think her parents would want to see their grandkids, but they never asked. They barely visited them even before the divorce. Now, they probably won't see them at all. As for Dan, he really did love his wife, and her betrayal destroyed him. The night he confronted her about the affair, he came to my place drunk with a bottle of whiskey in his hand and scratches on his face. I was terrified he had driven like that. But none of that mattered to him compared to being betrayed by the woman he married. He sat in my camper for hours so we wouldn't disturb my tenants. He drank straight from the bottle, crying that he was an idiot for marrying her. Nowadays, he only refers to her using one insulting nickname, and honestly, she earned it. Ironically, those few hours were the closest we had been in over 15 years. He didn't apologize directly, but he called himself a horrible person with terrible taste in women. Then he said, at least I didn't make his mistakes. Despite everything he put me through in the past, he's still my younger brother. I couldn't let him drive, so I took his keys and told him to stay the night. I set up a place for him to sleep in my camper since my rooms were rented out. He was in no condition to go home, and a taxi would have cost too much, plus he'd have to come back for his car. And honestly, I was scared he'd do something stupid if I let him leave. About a month after separating from his wife, Dan came back to ask if he could borrow my camper permanently. He said that after she moved out, he gave his bedroom to his oldest child, an 8-year-old boy, who previously had to share a room with his younger sisters. They had only hung curtains to divide the space, and the poor kid often slept on the couch just to avoid the chaos. He wanted to give him his own room. If he could have afforded his own camper, he would have bought one. So I gave in and let him have mine for the sake of the kids. No, I didn't charge him rent. He was already drowning financially because of the divorce. I brought the camper to my parents' backyard, and my dad installed a 30-amp breaker so the AC and heat would run properly. I do miss that camper. After living in it so many years, it feels like a part of me. But the only reason I loaned it out was the children. They are the only reason I still do anything for my parents or for Dan. I know I probably won't get the camper back anytime soon, and likely not in the same condition, but I made it clear that Dan and our parents are financially responsible for any damage. I also took tons of photos and videos before giving it to him. Dan even recorded a video agreeing to all the terms. It's basically a contract. Realistically, Dan won't be able to buy his own home for years. The divorce destroyed him financially. I don't know if he really likes living this new lifestyle or if he just pretends, but everyone in the family praised me for letting him use the camper. Some even said I'm the good brother he doesn't deserve. In any case, getting rid of my former sister-in-law was the first real step towards fixing our family. I still don't care much about my parents or Dan after they mistreated me my whole life, but I won't let his kids suffer for it. They've grown incredibly close to me. They're genuinely happy when they see me. I've even babysat them a few times. Without their mother around, they've become kinder, especially toward me. I'm finally starting to enjoy being an uncle. My dad often looks uncomfortable around me, but otherwise he behaves normally. Our relationship has improved, but I'm not letting my guard down. My parents are relieved she's out of their house. They even say they don't understand what they ever saw in her, especially my mother, who constantly fought with her about who ran the household. During the divorce, Dan also filed to have his name removed from the baby's birth certificate. My former sister-in-law didn't want that because it meant she'd lose any chance of getting money from him. But the court ordered a paternity test for the lover. I would have laughed for days if it turned out he wasn't the father either, but he was. Her lawyer realized she had no way to fight this. She couldn't afford a legal battle. She agreed to amend the birth certificate so the biological father, the man who got her pregnant, would take financial responsibility. Later, the guy contacted Dan through his attorney to say he broke up with her and wouldn't bother Dan again. I checked his social media when Dan sent me the profile. He was complaining non-stop about having to pay for a child he never planned to have, and whining that he was too young for that kind of responsibility. According to Dan's lawyer, the guy is a little over 40, though he looks younger. And that's where things end, hopefully. She's out of our lives. My parents and brother are trying, for once, to be better people. I'm surprisingly happy to finally enjoy being an uncle, and my home, thankfully, is still mine.
Part 8. My ex-sister-in-law saw my posts online. She was furious because there was nothing she could do about them. Thanks to the restraining order, she couldn't contact me directly. She probably couldn't afford a lawyer either, since the divorce had hit her finances hard. She complained to Dan, demanding he tell me to remove my posts. Dan read them too, but he had no problem with them. He said they served as a reminder of the scumbag he used to be. Besides, I was still helping him, despite everything he had done to me. My parents have also been trying to treat Dan and me more equally when I'm around. My father is still quiet in my presence. Someone joked that he just doesn't know how to communicate with me anymore, after all those years of pitting me against Dan. My mother has developed a habit of apologizing for even small things around me. She told Dan that both she and my father were often criticized by relatives and their psychologist, and now she feels the need to apologize for everything. The ex-sister-in-law found out that Dan borrowed my camper so his son could have his old bedroom. As a typical abuser, she mocked him, claiming he now lived like a homeless person. Dan took it calmly.
He knew that's exactly how she would react. For him, she was practically dead to him, and her insults didn't register. He explained that living in the old camper was a choice to prioritize his children so his son could have his own room, something the ex-sister-in-law never did. She used her children and pregnancies to avoid work and emotionally manipulate everyone. Early in the divorce, Dan realized she had no intention of changing. Dan told me that his ex-wife threw a huge fit over my recent posts, but no one contacted me on her behalf to try to remove them. She'll just have to live with the shame. Lately, she's been trying to behave better toward Dan, likely because living with her parents isn't fun. Dan tolerates her when she visits because she's the mother of his children, nothing more. He said he can never see her the same way again, and the mere thought of her disgusts him. Reconciliation? Practically impossible. Part 9. My pickup truck got egged on Halloween. This happened late at night or early morning on November 1st. I suspect it was my ex-sister-in-law. The person caught on my cameras wore multiple layers of thick clothing, big glasses covering the eyes, and a scarf over the lower face. I couldn't even tell if it was a man or a woman. They came on foot, so there was no car to track. They were roughly the same height as my ex-sister-in-law, but that alone wasn't enough to prove anything. If it was her, she must have known about my cameras, which is why she covered herself so thoroughly. A small act of egged revenge might have been the smartest thing she did in years, and a way to put her education to use. It happened around 3 a.m. I was sound asleep and didn't hear anything. The person threw about a dozen eggs at my pickup. They didn't try to do real damage and disappeared quickly after the last egg. I didn't notice anything until I left for work in the morning. During lunch, I drove the truck to a local car wash. Most of the eggs washed off. Eggs can damage paint, but my 1990s pickup wasn't in pristine condition anyway. I took photos and filed a police report, attaching the video as evidence, but so far nothing has come of it. No real damage was done, aside from my irritation and the $15 I spent at the car wash. If it was my ex-sister-in-law, she was clever enough to throw eggs instead of scratching the paint or slashing tires. I don't expect much from the police, who probably dismissed it as some kid's prank. I at least filed a report in case something happens again. I waited a bit before writing this post to see if anything else would occur. Nothing did. I'd appreciate any advice on what to do if something like this happens again.
My wife cheated on me with her gym trainer, and when she asked for a divorce, she demanded half of everything we owned. What she didn't know was that our house and all our savings were legally registered under my father's name. I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but here I am. I'm 35, and I've been working as an accountant at a local firm for almost a decade. I like to think of myself as a practical, level-headed guy. Maybe that's why I'm managing to stay calm through all this. My wife, Katie, is 33. We'd been together for about 5 years, married for 2, no kids, and honestly, looking back now, that might have been a blessing. After the wedding, she stopped working. She used to be in marketing, but said she wanted a break to focus on us. I didn't argue. I earned enough to support both of us and assumed it was temporary. We had a house, a comfortable amount of savings, nothing extravagant, but a stable, normal life. Then, gradually, something changed. Katie grew distant, she stayed out longer with friends or at the gym, avoided affection, got irritated whenever I asked what was wrong. At first, I chalked it up to stress, but the feeling that something was off kept growing, and unfortunately, I was right. One evening, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen without thinking. A message from someone named Derek. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow, baby." I opened the chat. The messages were explicit, romantic, full of plans that didn't include me. She had been seeing him for months. I just stared at the screen, numb. This was the woman I trusted, the person I built a life with. But instead of anger, all I felt was emptiness. Maybe shock, maybe my rational side kicking in. When Katie came out of the bathroom, I handed her the phone and calmly asked her to explain. She tried to brush it off at first. "It's just a joke, it's nothing serious." But when I read a few messages aloud, she realized lying was pointless. And then, without hesitation, she said, "I want a divorce." No apology,
No tears, no guilt, just cold, matter-of-fact. She admitted she'd been seeing Derek for a while and wasn't happy in our marriage anymore. She didn't sugarcoat anything. She was leaving for him. But what stunned me wasn't even the affair. It was what she said next. She wanted half of everything we owned. She even claimed she deserved it because she gave up her career for our relationship. Her entitlement was unbelievable, but I stayed calm, not because I'm some saint, but because I knew something she didn't. I agreed to the divorce, told her I wouldn't fight it. She looked shocked, probably expecting shouting or some dramatic meltdown, but I wasn't giving her that satisfaction. Here's what Katie never knew. Almost everything we owned was legally registered under my father's name. Years ago, when I first started earning good money, my dad suggested registering major assets like the house and most of my investments under him. He said it would protect me if anything ever went wrong, debts, lawsuits, or, well, exactly this. I didn't think much of it then. It just seemed like smart financial planning. So when Katie tried to demand half of our estate, she had no idea that legally I owned almost nothing. My car, a modest bank account, and a few personal items. That was it. The house belonged to my father. Most of the savings were on his accounts, too. To avoid a messy legal fight, I suggested mediation. She agreed, convinced she'd walk away with a small fortune. She had no clue that everything had been arranged years before she even met me. When the divorce process started, I told my dad everything. He wasn't thrilled, but he understood. We spoke with a lawyer to make sure all paperwork was solid, and it was flawless. Katie could demand all she wanted, but there was nothing for her to take. She went in expecting half a house and a pile of savings. She came out realizing I barely owned anything at all.
She wasted no time hiring an aggressive attorney, the kind of shark who promises to tear everything out of the other party. I hired a calm but experienced lawyer who specialized in cases with complicated financial structures. I didn't want a dramatic courtroom battle, but I also wasn't going to let Katie and her lawyer pressure me. The first step of the divorce was financial disclosure, and as you can probably guess, that did not go the way Katie expected. I provided all the documents the law required, but once she saw how little was actually in my name, her attorney stopped smirking. They both looked confused, maybe even suspicious, but they couldn't argue with the paperwork. Everything I submitted was true. There were no hidden accounts or secret assets. Katie snapped right there in the meeting, shouting that I was lying, calling me names. But I had shown everything I legally owned. After a few minutes of her screaming, I simply stood up and told her we could continue once she calmed down. And now I'm here, unsure whether I did the right thing. I agreed to give her half of everything, knowing she wouldn't get anywhere close to what she imagined. Update 1. Things begin to escalate. Right after the asset disclosure, Katie completely lost her composure. She was convinced I was hiding something. Her attorney wasn't much better. The look on their faces when they saw the tiny numbers next to my name was priceless. Within days, they demanded a deeper investigation. Katie kept repeating, "Where's the money? The house, the investments, everything we built?" She truly believed I had some giant stash of assets hidden somewhere. Her attorney hired a forensic accountant to dig through every transaction. I was a little nervous, not because I was guilty of anything, but because I knew this would drag the divorce out even longer. After talking with my attorney and reviewing all documents again, it became clear they weren't going to find anything. Everything I submitted was 100% accurate. There wasn't a single trail that could lead back to the assets under my father's name. As the investigation continued, Katie became more irritated and desperate. She was used to getting what she wanted, and this time there was nothing to take. The realization that she'd walk away with almost nothing was unbearable for her. Her next move was to claim she had made a significant contribution to my career and our lifestyle. She insisted that by staying home and managing the house, I gave her the freedom to focus on work and succeed. Sure,
Sometimes her help made daily life easier, but I'm not the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. I'm a mid-level accountant. My income has been steady for years. There was no magical rise she could take credit for. But she kept pushing the narrative that she sacrificed her marketing career for me, even though she worked only briefly and quit by her own choice. Her attorney brought this up again and again, trying to frame me as someone who exploited her sacrifice. But there was no evidence to support that claim.
At one point, they even tried dragging my parents into the process. Katie wanted to prove that they had secretly given me money or helped me hide assets. And that was the moment I finally lost my patience. My parents had nothing to do with any of this, and involving them was a cheap, disgusting move. Thankfully, my lawyer shut that down immediately, but it showed just how desperate Katie had become. As the divorce dragged on, she switched to a different tactic. If she couldn't get what she wanted in court, she tried to ruin my reputation instead. She began telling everyone in our social circle that I had been hiding money from her for years, that I was financially abusive. I couldn't believe the lies she was spreading. Mutual friends told me she constantly complained that I was leaving her with nothing and had deceived her into thinking we had more than we actually did. She even went on social media, posting vague but obvious jabs about narcissist and betrayal. Some people sided with her. There are always those who automatically believe whoever cries the loudest. But most of our real friends knew the truth. They understood I wasn't capable of what she accused me of. Watching her drag my name through the mud just because things didn't go her way was painful. But I tried not to let it get to me. I knew the truth, and so did the people who mattered. Meanwhile, I focused on protecting myself. My lawyer and I stayed in constant communication, collecting every message, every demand, every attempt she made to twist the story. If things went to court, I wanted everything documented. I also gathered proof of her affair with Derek. Screenshots, their photos together, even statements from a couple of her friends who knew about the cheating. I didn't want to humiliate her, I just wanted the truth to be clear. On top of that, I prepared for what I knew was coming. Once it became obvious she wouldn't be getting half of everything, the real ugliness would begin. I kept my distance, focused on work, and handled the legal side quietly and carefully. Meanwhile, Derek's attitude started changing too. When Katie first told him she wanted to leave me for him, he seemed enthusiastic. They had some fantasy about starting a new life together. But as soon as the divorce turned into a nightmare, Derek began pulling away. Apparently, he wasn't as in love as she thought. From what I heard, he panicked when he realized being with her meant dealing with her financial mess. Rumors started spreading that he was losing clients at the gym because of the scandal. Nobody wants a trainer who sleeps with married women. He's now avoiding her, and she's finally beginning to realize this wasn't a fairy tale, but a delusion. Sometimes I almost feel sorry for her. Then I remember everything she did, and the sympathy disappears. I have mixed emotions. On one hand, yes, I'm relieved. I protected my money, and she's not walking away with what she expected. On the other hand, it's sad. This was still my marriage. I once loved her and believed we had a future. Watching it fall apart hurts, even if I know this outcome is for the best. Update 2. Things get even crazier. Since my last update, everything spiraled even further. Katie is in full-blown panic mode, and it's showing in the worst ways. She finally accepted that she won't get the payout she was counting on. So now she's trying to turn my life into hell. Her latest stunt is threatening to destroy my career. She told me outright that if I didn't be more generous, she would make sure everyone in my office found out what a monster I supposedly am. At first, I wasn't even sure what she meant, until she started showing up at my office unannounced. The first time, she pretended she just wanted to talk. But when I made it clear there was nothing left to discuss, she snapped, raising her voice, saying things like, "I'll make sure everyone knows who you really are." Luckily, I managed to get her out before it turned into a full-blown scene, but it's obvious she's becoming unpredictable. Back at her parents' house, where she's living now, things aren't great either. From what I heard, they support her, but they're not thrilled with the situation. Once she realized she wasn't getting the jackpot she imagined, she moved in with them, and apparently tensions there are growing too. At this point, even her own parents seem to be realizing that her victim act is nothing more than a performance.
Mutual friends told me she's been snapping at everyone, fighting with her family, and acting like she's on the verge of a breakdown. The legal side of everything has also become more chaotic. Katie's lawyer is desperately trying to dig up anything they can use against me. They even filed a motion to subpoena my parents and demand their financial records, despite my attorney repeatedly explaining that my parents' assets have nothing to do with this divorce. It's obvious they're trying to rattle me, but it isn't working. Her legal team has also requested statements from my coworkers, hoping to find hidden income or under-the-table payments. They're grabbing at straws, but they keep coming up empty. Every time we shut down one of their requests, another one pops up. The whole thing feels like an endless chess match. They try to counter every move I make, but so far I've managed to stay one step ahead thanks to my attorney, and thanks to the financial safeguards my father put in place years ago. Still, it's exhausting, and I'm not sure how much longer I can deal with this before the case finally goes to trial. As for mediation, we've attempted it twice, and both times were disasters. The first session lasted maybe 20 minutes. Katie refused to back down from demanding half the house and half the savings. My lawyer calmly stated the facts. The house is legally in my father's name, and the savings aren't remotely what she imagines. She didn't want to hear it. She stormed out, accused everyone of lying, and claimed the mediator was biased. The second attempt wasn't any better. This time she arrived with an absurd list of demands: full ownership of the house, half of all assets, which barely exist, and alimony for at least 5 years. When my attorney explained, again, that none of this was legally justified, she lost control completely. She screamed that she gave up everything for me and that I was abandoning her with nothing. I sat there trying to stay composed, but inside I was boiling. She was the one who cheated, the one who walked away, and yet she paints me as the villain who destroyed her life? After that meeting, it became obvious. This divorce would only end in court. Meanwhile, Katie has been borrowing money from family and friends to keep paying her attorney. Clearly, she didn't expect the divorce to drag on this long, and now she's running out of resources. I honestly don't know how she plans to keep funding her overly aggressive lawyer, but that's no longer my problem. The more desperate she gets, the more unstable her behavior becomes. Friends told me she barely leaves the house and constantly complains to anyone who will listen that I've ruined her life. Even her own friends are starting to distance themselves. They're tired of the endless drama and the way she keeps replaying the victim narrative. It's clear that everything she hoped to gain from this divorce is slipping through her fingers. All the while, I'm doing my best to stay calm and strategic. Every accusation she throws at me, I counter with documentation. Every financial record they request, I provide. I have nothing to hide. My lawyer makes sure we follow the law down to the last detail, something I can't say for Katie's side. I've also been protecting my parents' privacy as much as possible. Her attempts to drag them into this mess make my blood boil. But thankfully, there are legal safeguards that prevent her from getting access to their financial documents. The fact that she even tried shows just how desperate she's become. She seems convinced that if she digs deep enough, she'll uncover some secret fortune. There is nothing to find. Update 3. The day of the hearing finally arrived, and the tension in the courtroom was intense. Katie testified first. She immediately went on the offensive, insisting I had been hiding assets for years. She accused me of manipulating our finances, keeping money in secret accounts, and lying about our actual income. She played up the emotion, painting herself as someone who had been left with nothing after sacrificing her career for mine. At one point, she even cried on the stand, talking about how much she trusted me. But everything changed when my attorney presented the evidence of her affair with Derek. As soon as the messages, photos, and timeline of their relationship were revealed, everyone, the judge, the jury, and even the people in the back, understood the truth. The sympathetic victim image she tried to build collapsed instantly. She tried to brush it off, saying it was a mistake and irrelevant to the divorce. But it was too late. Her credibility was gone, and it became obvious that her financial demands were driven purely by greed. When it was my turn to testify, I stayed calm and stuck strictly to the facts.
My attorney had prepared me well, so I knew that any emotional outburst or attempt to justify myself would only hurt the case. I calmly explained how my assets had been placed under my father's ownership years before, how I fully disclosed every financial detail, and how I tried to resolve everything amicably through mediation. I also described her threats, her unstable behavior, and the smear campaign she had been running against me. My lawyer presented documentation refuting each of her accusations, both the legal claims and the lies she spread publicly, proving that none of it had any real foundation. We laid everything out clearly. The house belongs to my father, our savings are modest, and there is no secret stash of money she could claim a share of. The judge seemed to appreciate my composure and straightforwardness. I didn't try to paint Katie as a villain, but I also didn't sugarcoat anything. The facts spoke for themselves. Several key witnesses testified, and their statements finally put everything in its proper place. My father testified first. He explained the financial arrangement we put in place years ago, how the house is legally in his name, how the investments are under his control, and that everything was structured for long-term financial protection. He made it clear those assets are his, not mine, and that Katie has no legal claim to them. Next, one of my coworkers testified. Katie's legal team tried to suggest I'd been getting under-the-table payments or hidden bonuses, but he shut that down immediately. He confirmed that I earn a standard salary and have no secret income. His testimony was crucial, proving her accusations were baseless. The judge saw that there was no conspiracy, just a straightforward, transparent financial structure that Katie never bothered to understand. After several days of testimony and legal arguments, the judge finally delivered the ruling. Hearing that the decision was in my favor felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest. Katie's demands for half the house and half our savings were completely denied. The judge ruled that since the house and most of the assets belonged to my father, Katie has no right to them. The only thing she was awarded was minimal, short-term alimony, barely enough to cover a fraction of her legal fees, let alone the lifestyle she imagined. He also specifically noted that her affair and her lack of contribution to our finances influenced the decision. He saw right through her attempts to play the victim and issued a fair verdict. When he finished reading the decision, I felt an enormous sense of relief. Months of stress, constant accusations, the fear of losing everything, all of it vanished in an instant. Legally, I was finally free. Katie, on the other hand, didn't take the ruling well. The moment the judge concluded, she burst into tears, yelling that the system was unfair and that I had stolen what she deserved. She ran out of the courtroom, leaving her lawyer looking stunned. I'm not sure what she expected, but it was obvious she wasn't ready for a loss. As for me, I felt only relief. I thanked my attorney, who did an incredible job, and walked out of the courthouse. My phone was exploding with messages, friends and family congratulating me. The news spread quickly, and soon everyone in our community knew how the case ended. It felt good knowing the truth had finally come out, and I could start moving on. But Katie didn't stop. Right outside the courthouse, she caused another scene in front of a small crowd, shouting that I manipulated the system and that she would appeal. The problem is, she has no money for an appeal. Her attorney had already hinted that her funds were gone, and now, from what I've heard, she's still borrowing from relatives and friends just to stay afloat. I'm endlessly grateful to my father for his foresight. I can't even imagine the mess I'd be in without his planning. And I'm grateful to my family, friends, and colleagues who didn't abandon me when she tried to destroy my reputation. Now, for the first time in a long while, I'm looking toward the future with hope. I know it will take time to recover, emotionally and financially, but I'm ready to rebuild.
This whole experience taught me a lot, and I won't make the same mistakes again. Right now, all I want is to return to a normal life and finally enjoy some peace.
Told my dad's friend exactly what I think of him. I told my father's longtime friend, a man who's treated me like a child my entire life, that I hate him. Years ago, my dad met a man named Harold through mutual friends, and they hit it off immediately. I was 18 at the time, a college student, and we were never close. Still, for some reason, Harold considered himself a family friend and always talked down to me like I was 5. Every time I saw him, I tried to convince myself he wasn't that bad, and every time, he proved me wrong within a minute. He didn't respect boundaries and loved to remind me I was just a kid. Whenever I joined a conversation, he'd mock me, my studies, my hobbies, anything, just to get a reaction. And when he saw he'd annoyed me, he'd grin and say, half jokingly, "Do you hate me yet?" I'd always reply, "No, but only because of Dad." The final straw came when I was 20. We were having a barbecue, and out of nowhere, Harold interrupted everyone to say, "You know, I actually like you, even though you're such a rude, arrogant girl." I'd been quiet the whole day, doing some homework while helping out, polite and calm every time someone spoke to me. Even if I hadn't been, that comment was completely out of line. After that, I started avoiding every family gathering where he might show up. Fast forward to yesterday, my dad's girlfriend was having a small birthday dinner at Dad's apartment. I came with my fiancé and our 6-month-old son, and of course, Harold was there. I hadn't seen him in years, but he talked to me exactly the same way, like I was some clueless teenager. Except now I'm 26, engaged, and a mother. Throughout the party, he kept offering advice that I was too young to marry, too young to raise a baby. Thankfully, most of the guests disagreed with him. My son slept through most of the afternoon, and when he woke up hungry, I went to feed him in my old bedroom. There's still a crib there. When I came back, I heard Harold joking about how long I'd been gone, making disgusting comments about me barely keeping up as a mom. Then he interrupted a conversation I was having with one of Dad's friends to start interrogating me about motherhood, like it was his business, and made more comments about my age. The moment he asked if I'd ever considered putting my baby up for adoption, I realized I was done. I grabbed my son, told my fiancé we were leaving, and said goodbye to everyone, except Harold. As we were heading for the door, he followed us, asking, "Why are you leaving?" I tried to brush him off, but he kept pressing. Finally, like he always did, he laughed and said, "Come on, do you hate me or something?" And this time, I looked him in the eye and said, "Yes, I do. Can we go now?" He just stood there speechless as we walked out. On the drive home, my fiancé told me he was proud of me. The next morning, my dad called and said the exact opposite, that I'd been rude, that I'd made things awkward. We argued a bit before deciding to drop it. I know this isn't over, but if it continues, it won't be because of me. It wasn't my proudest moment, and part of me regrets saying it out loud, but I'm done letting that man humiliate me. Edit. Wow, there are a lot of comments here, so I'll answer a few common ones. No, I don't think Harold is secretly in love with me. His behavior has always been patronizing and dismissive, not flirty. And for the record, no, he didn't tell me to give up my son. He asked me if I'd thought about it when I first got pregnant. Still an awful question, especially since he cut off another woman who was also pregnant just to say it. I don't like drama. When someone makes me uncomfortable, I leave. When I don't like a person, I avoid them. It's easier that way. My dad and I argued until I told him exactly what Harold said about adoption. That finally shut him up, though I don't think he fully understood that this wasn't the only reason I left. It was just the last straw. I don't expect my dad to stop being friends with Harold. He's an adult and can make his own choices. I never told him I hated Harold before because I didn't think I needed to. He's Dad's friend, not mine. I've been distancing myself from that man since I was 20. I've seen him maybe twice in 6 years. My fiancé didn't hear the comments. He was across the room, but I told him everything in the car, and he's completely on my side. Before we move to the update, I'll throw the question to you all. Do you think I was right to finally tell Harold I hated him?
Personally, I think I was. He'd pushed me for years, waiting for that reaction, and I finally gave it to him. There's a big difference between teasing a teenager and insulting a grown woman who's a mother. Some people need to learn that line.
Update 1. Hey everyone. I honestly didn't plan to write an update, but I had a bit of time, so here we are. Let's start with the biggest theory, that Harold has a crush on me. I really don't think that's true. His comments have always been annoying and condescending, but never sexual. Though I'll admit, some of your replies made me a bit uneasy. Even if I regretted my words at first, I never once doubted that standing up to him was the right thing to do. I think the regret came from realizing that 8 years of keeping the peace had finally ended. It took a bit of time to feel the relief, but it came. Honestly, I wanted to tell him off ever since that barbecue years ago. That's when he went from annoying to insufferable. The day after I posted, my dad called Harold. Apparently, Harold tried to spin everything, said the adoption comment came from a place of concern, that he just worried I became a mom too young and didn't know what I was doing. He even apologized to my dad. Yeah, right. I don't buy it for a second. The next day, Dad called me and said I should forgive Harold because it was all a misunderstanding. He even suggested I apologize for overreacting and saying I hated him over something so small. Thing is, Harold made plenty of demeaning comments right in front of my dad, usually when others were around, so Dad just never noticed. He tends to ignore anything that doesn't directly affect or anger him. So no, I don't expect him to suddenly understand. For him, nothing Harold said was that bad. For me, it was years of disrespect. I told my father I hadn't exaggerated when I said I hated Harold, and that his comment about adoption wasn't the only reason. I listed nearly every humiliating thing he'd ever said or done, including what happened at the party. He didn't remember any of it. I made it very clear that I despised Harold long before that day and had nothing to apologize for. Then I told him that I wouldn't attend any event where Harold would be present. My father didn't have to stop being friends with him or inviting him over, but he needed to understand that he couldn't count on me being there. I said I'd always ask in advance who was invited, and if he lied, I'd simply leave. Dad said I was overreacting, but I reminded him that I had been avoiding Harold for 6 years, and no one even noticed, so clearly it wasn't a problem for anyone. Since that barbecue incident, I'd only seen him twice, once at lunch last week, and another time when I was pregnant. Clearly, my father's life hadn't fallen apart without me socializing with his friend. I told him I wasn't obligated to like his friends, just like he wasn't required to like mine. We argued a bit, but in the end, he agreed to my terms. Yesterday, while we were talking about something unrelated, he casually mentioned that Harold was upset. I ignored it. I'm not planning to cut contact with my father completely. I know there were moments over the past few years when I was close to doing it, but ultimately I realized it wouldn't change much. Our relationship actually became easier once I moved out. Now we only see each other a couple of times a month. It still annoys him that I rarely call or text, but at least he stopped complaining. There's no point in cutting off someone who no longer has control over your life. It's better to remember what they did wrong while raising you and make sure not to repeat their mistakes with your own child. Though honestly, my father's been walking on thin ice for a long time. I don't let him stay alone with my son. I don't trust him for more than an hour. When I got pregnant, I began encouraging him to start therapy. And finally, this June, he did. His attitude toward me and my younger sister, who splits her time between our divorced parents, has genuinely improved since then. I made it clear that if he quits therapy, I won't let him see his grandson. For the first time ever, my dad actually seems to be changing for the better. It's hard to stay optimistic, but I'm trying. And if I ever decide to go no contact, it definitely won't be because of damn Harold. That's about it, really. I'm relieved that I don't have to pretend anymore. Things with my father are still tense, but I'm not dwelling on it. My main priorities are my son, my fiancé, and my work, and that's not going to change anytime soon.
Update 2. Last week, my fiancé, our baby, and I spent a few days visiting my cousin. On the day we arrived, we went with her to pick up her daughter, my little cousin, I'll just call her my niece, from school. When we got there, she was chatting with a boy. She saw us, gave him a friendly goodbye hug, oh the horror, and ran over to us. We talked for a bit, and then she immediately focused on my son, completely smitten. She grabbed my fiancé's hand and dragged him off to show our baby to our classmates while I waited with my cousin. A few minutes later, someone called out my cousin's name. It was the boy's mother. She walked over, pointed at my cousin, and snapped, "You need to teach your daughter some manners. She shouldn't be talking to my son, let alone hugging him. They're far too young for that." Then she turned around and left without waiting for a reply. For reference, both kids are 5. All he did was compliment her Shrek Crocs. Update 3. I checked someone's essay for grammar, and now that person blames me for getting a failing grade. Since high school, I've occasionally proofread friends' papers, mostly fixing grammar and making small tweaks. One friend didn't even understand what paragraphs were until college. I'm no professional, but I've always been decent enough that people kept recommending me. I graduated in 2019, I don't teach, don't study anymore, and don't charge money, I just do it for fun, though lately not so often. I have a job, a husband, and a baby, and most of my friends finished school years ago. One of the few exceptions was a close friend who recently decided to get a second degree. Last week's class had to submit a big written project, and he recommended me to a classmate. Let's call him Derek. He's 18 and sounded normal on the phone, though in hindsight I think he was probably high. He promised to send his paper at least 24 hours before the deadline so I could check it for grammar. Instead, he sent it at 1 a.m. the day it was due at 7:30 a.m. I was annoyed, but decided to keep my word. It was 3 pages long, and I immediately realized that at least half of it had been written by ChatGPT, badly. The facts were wrong, it even mixed up 2 completely different people, which ruined the entire section. But since it was 1 a.m., and the grammar in that part was fine, I focused only on fixing the truly awful mistakes in the rest. I sent it back within an hour. He didn't even thank me. Yesterday, Derek got his grade, 2 out of 10. His professor apparently said that was generous. Derek's reaction, he texted me, "What the hell did you do? You were supposed to fix everything." I reminded him that I only correct grammar, not factual errors. Both I and our mutual friend had told him that multiple times. He kept arguing that I should have rewritten the wrong parts since I noticed them. So basically, this guy submitted a half AI written paper and now blames me for his failure. Judging by his messages, he actually expected me to rewrite chunks of the essay for him. The audacity. I get it. Being a student is hard. I've been there. But I would never treat someone who's helping me for free like that. Honestly, I'm seriously considering never proofreading anyone's work again. Update 4. A quick one, but it's about Harold. Hi, everyone. Can't believe it's been over a year since my last update. I meant to write sooner, but life has been hectic. Raising a toddler, getting married, working like crazy, and binge-watching Supernatural. So yeah, I've been busy. Avoiding Harold openly has worked beautifully. My father respects my boundaries. Every time he invites my husband and I for dinner, I ask who else will be there, and if Harold's on the list, he tells me honestly. He's never lied, and he doesn't insist if I say I'm not coming. Since then, I've only seen Harold once, at my father's birthday party a couple of months ago. Yes, I knew he'd be there. My dad promised to tell him not to talk to me. Plus, there were going to be kids there, children of my dad's friends, some of whom I used to babysit. I love those kids more than I hate Harold, so I went. I spent most of the evening with my son and the kids. Harold didn't speak to me once, so I guess my father kept his word, though I did notice Harold glance at us a few times, and my husband caught him too, and my husband, the calmest man alive, somehow managed to look intimidating in return. God, I love that man. But guess who did talk to me? Harold's new girlfriend. Yep, he's dating someone now. We crossed paths twice. First when she came over to coo over my son and told me he needed a haircut. Instant dislike. Later she came back and said, "You're shy, aren't you?" I said, "No." She laughed and added, "Oh yes, you are." She said it in that sing-song tone people use with 6-year-olds. I barely kept a straight face, otherwise I might have told her that I just preferred hanging out with kids who were far better company than her and her insufferable boyfriend. Honestly, they're perfect for each other. Not much else to add. My dad broke up with the woman he was dating last year, long story, and now he has a new girlfriend. She's not annoying or crazy, and honestly, I like her.
Still, I'd bet their relationship won't last more than a year. Things with my dad aren't perfect, but they're better. He actually apologizes now. Maybe it's therapy working. Or maybe motherhood just made me terrifying. Either way, I'm not complaining. And I have to admit, he's turned out to be a great grandpa. I'm genuinely happy my father continues to respect my boundaries regarding Harold. I don't need that man in my life at all. Right now, I'm content. My son's happy and healthy. Part of me misses when he was tiny, but I'm prouder of him every single day. Watching your child grow into himself, it's just the best feeling in the world.
My grandparents gave me a trip to Rome, but my parents forced me to hand it over to my golden child sister. She ended up crashing on the way to the airport, so I took my ticket back and went anyway. Hi, I'm 18, and for my birthday, my grandparents on my dad's side gifted me a plane ticket to Rome plus a check for travel expenses. I was beyond excited, but the very next day, my parents started pressuring me to be selfless and give the trip to my older sister, June. She's 21 and the golden child of the family, if that wasn't already obvious. Their excuse? June is studying architecture, and seeing Rome in person would be an amazing opportunity for her resume and her language skills. I pointed out that I'm going into literature, and Rome would be just as valuable for me, but they didn't care. The kicker? June had already been given the same choice at 18. Grandparents offered her a trip abroad, but she turned it down and asked for cash instead. My turn finally came, and suddenly I'm not allowed to enjoy it. For weeks, the arguments dragged on. My parents guilt-tripped me, listing every sacrifice they've made for me, calling it a small favor to give up this trip. I resisted at first, until one day they slipped up and said they didn't want the trip wasted on me. That broke me. Basically, if I went, it was worthless, but if June went, it mattered. They tried to backtrack, but the damage was done. Eventually, I gave in and said, fine, whatever. I figured there was no way the airline would even allow them to change the ticket, so I still had my check at least. But somehow, they pulled strings. On the day of the flight, June showed up with my boarding pass and headed to the airport instead. And then, karma hit. On the way, we got a call. June had been in a car accident. Apparently, she grabbed the steering wheel of the taxi because she thought the driver was taking the wrong route. The car spun out and hit a tree. June walked away with scratches, but the poor driver took the full impact. Broken arm, deep head gash, hospitalized. He's suing her now, and my parents are panicking, trying to cover the damages with their savings. When they told me what happened, I snapped. The words just slipped out. That's karma for forcing me to give up Rome. They were horrified, told me I was heartless, that words carry weight, and now they finally saw my true selfish nature. Hypocrisy much? They literally told me my trip would be wasted if I went, but apparently that wasn't cruel. Furious, I grabbed a small bag, ordered a taxi, and headed to the hospital myself. I realized in that moment, no matter what I did, my family would never see me as worthy or equal, so why keep sacrificing for them? When I arrived, June was busy spinning her version of the accident to the cops, trying to claim it wasn't her fault. I didn't even bother arguing. I just walked up and asked her one thing. Do you still have my boarding pass? Update. My grandparents gave me a trip to Rome. My parents forced me to give it to my golden child's sister. She crashed on the way to the airport, and I ended up taking the ticket back and flying anyway. So, yeah, here's what happened next. When I confronted June at the hospital, she looked completely stunned and confused. I didn't even wait for her to respond. I grabbed her bag, dug through it, and found my boarding pass. Without another word, I bolted out, jumped into the taxi, and rushed straight to the airport. I barely made it in time,
but somehow, against all odds, I ended up on the plane. And then it hit me. I was actually flying to Rome. I didn't check my phone until I landed. And wow, my family is furious. My parents think I'm a heartless monster because, in their words, I abandoned my sister after the accident. The accident she caused herself, might I add. June is pissed because she claims I stole her chance, when in reality, she stole mine first. All I did was take back what was mine to begin with. Apparently, the family consensus is that I was wrong and owe everyone an apology. June even texted me that her parents are draining their savings to pay off the taxi driver who's suing her for damages, and that I should be helpful by handing over the birthday check my grandparents gave me. According to her, I'm selfish for traveling while the family is suffering. But honestly, I don't think I owe anyone anything. To answer some of the questions people had, the boarding pass issue. I'm 99% sure my parents never actually figured out how to legally transfer the ticket. June probably just planned to show up and bluff her way through security. If they'd really switched the booking, I wouldn't have been able to board with my passport. So their plan was just smoke and mirrors, and it backfired. Why I still live at home? It's complicated. I grew up believing that if I just tried harder, my parents would eventually treat me like they treat June. I spent 18 years trying to earn their love, never realizing how toxic that mindset was. Moving in with my grandparents never seemed like an option. They live far out of town, and honestly, I thought keeping the peace with my parents was my best shot. Spoiler, it wasn't. But now I'm realizing I don't have to live like this anymore. My relationship with June? We've never been close. I don't hate her, she doesn't hate me, we just don't get along. She's always been controlling, the kind of person who had to sit in the front seat even on family trips. So of course she tried to take the wheel from the taxi driver because she thought she knew the faster route. That's exactly the kind of thing she does. And yes, my parents aren't doing great financially. Mom's a nurse, dad's a high school football coach. They rely heavily on my grandparents' help. Now, with this lawsuit hanging over them, they're in real trouble. If they want financial help from my grandparents, they'll have to admit what actually happened, which I doubt they're eager to do.
Update number 1. I've had a couple of days to think it over, and honestly, I've decided not to waste this trip worrying about my parents or June. This is probably the last chance I'll get for years. Once I start college, I won't have this kind of freedom again. So I'm going to enjoy Rome. My sister made her choices, my parents made theirs. For once in my life, I'm choosing me. Update number 2. My Rome trip changed everything. Now I live with my grandparents. They're adults and they can deal with their own mess. It's not my fault they tried to take something that was never theirs to begin with and ended up facing the consequences. You guys were right. It was foolish of me to ever expect them to appreciate my sacrifice. They'll always resent me no matter what I do. So why should I keep giving up my happiness for them? Right now, I'm having the best time of my life in Rome. This morning, I finally opened up to my grandparents about everything. How my parents have treated me all these years, how they've always put June first, and how I was constantly overlooked. Even my closest friends never knew the full story. So telling my grandparents felt like a huge weight lifted off my chest. They were shocked that it had gone on for so long and that I kept quiet. I told them I always thought if I just stay quiet and keep trying to be the perfect daughter, eventually my parents will love me too. But now I finally understand. That day will never come. My grandparents told me I did the right thing. They insisted that when I come back from Rome, I should go straight to their house instead of my parents'. They said they'll make all the arrangements for me to move in with them. When I reminded them that I'll be starting college in the fall, they smiled and said that's not a problem. They'll cover all my expenses themselves. That one conversation literally changed my life. For the first time, I know where I'll belong when I return. My parents are furious, of course. They never planned to pay for my college anyway. They had told me from the start that, since they already paid for June's education, I was on my own. But now it doesn't matter. I'll be okay. Update number 3. My trip ended a few days ago, and I'm officially living with my grandparents. When I got back, I went straight to their house, and to my surprise, they had already prepared a guest room for me and even hired movers to bring all my things from my parents' place. They welcomed me so warmly, I almost cried. They told me what happened after our phone call. Apparently, the night of June's accident, my parents had called my grandparents asking for help. They didn't want to dip into their own savings or risk a lawsuit, especially since the dashcam footage clearly showed June was at fault. The only way out was a settlement, but the taxi driver was asking for a huge sum. When they all met, my grandparents first asked my parents about me, whether it was true they had always treated me unfairly and even forced me to give up my Rome trip. My parents tried to brush it off, saying it wasn't the time to discuss me since I was off partying in Rome. But my grandparents pressed, and eventually my parents snapped and admitted everything. They said yes, it was true, but claimed I deserved it, because I abandoned the family when things got hard. They accused me of showing up at the hospital only to snatch the boarding pass, not caring about June. They even said I'd always been jealous because June was better at everything. Then they called me spoiled and selfish, and told my grandparents that when I returned, they wouldn't tolerate me anymore. That was the final straw. My grandparents cut ties with them on the spot. My parents told them if they wanted to take me in, then fine, because they were done with me anyway. Hearing all this broke my heart. Deep down, I always knew my parents didn't care about me, but having them outright say it, that hurt more than I can describe. I cried so much that night. But through it all, my grandparents stood by me. They've shown me what family is supposed to feel like. For the first time in my life, I finally feel safe. This is my home now until I leave for college in a couple of months. And honestly, I couldn't be more grateful. Update number 4. My grandparents completely changed my life, and my parents got a reality check. When I leave for college, I won't have to worry about a thing. My grandparents are covering all my expenses. Since returning, I haven't spoken to my parents or June at all. I didn't even read their last messages because I wanted to just enjoy my trip. June's messages were all the same, calling me selfish, spoiled, worthless, and saying she's glad she doesn't have to deal with me anymore because I'm unworthy of her company. Honestly, I think she got it backwards. She's the one unworthy of mine. But I really don't care. The words that hurt most come from my parents, though even their words no longer surprise me.
They sent messages accusing me of being heartless, saying they should have stopped me at the hospital, claiming it was their fault for not raising me properly, and pointing out that even at the hospital, I escaped to go on the trip. They kept repeating things like, "We did everything to give you a comfortable life." Comfortable life doesn't equal good childhood, I thought. Sure, they fed me, clothed me, and put a roof over my head, but that doesn't erase years of neglect, favoritism, and emotional harm. They said I complained out of jealousy of June, and therefore calling them villains was unfair. Then they concluded by calling me a void, saying I wasted their time and energy, and now they're finally happy without me. It stung, and I nearly cried. But after talking with my grandparents, I promised myself I would no longer let their cruel words break me. I blocked my parents, cutting off all contact. I need to start healing and maybe erase their toxic influence from my mind. I don't know if I can do it completely, but I will try. The funniest, most insane part happened today. It's been almost 2 weeks since I returned from Rome. I had no clue what was going on with my parents or June. I assumed they were still scrambling money for the taxi settlement. But today, out of nowhere, my parents showed up at my grandparents' house, clearly ready for revenge. Thankfully, they didn't even acknowledge me. They went straight to the living room where my grandparents were. I froze, unsure what to do, but my grandparents told me to sit with them. They could see the looks on my parents' faces, annoyance, anger, but nothing was said out loud. When my grandparents asked why they had come, the parents said they still expected compensation for all the money they supposedly spent on me over the years. They pulled out documents claiming I owed them almost $120,000 for raising me. I was floored. The audacity. These were the people who had done the bare minimum, and now they were trying to profit off of it? My grandparents calmly asked to speak privately, leaving me out. After a few tense minutes, they came back and said they were willing to pay, but only if my parents returned all the money they had borrowed from my grandparents over the years. That was it. My parents were completely blindsided, and I couldn't stop laughing. Eventually, they shouted, slammed the door, and left. I don't think they'll be back anytime soon, and honestly, it doesn't matter. My grandparents have proven they can handle them, and my father being their only son doesn't change anything. I leave for college in a few months, and for the first time in my life, I'm genuinely excited. Looking back, going to Rome was probably the best decision I've ever made. It not only gave me an amazing trip, but also helped me finally claim my life and freedom.
I tricked my cheating wife into believing that I was the one having an affair, then vanished like a nuclear ghost ninja and handed her the divorce papers on Christmas Day. Here's the full story. It spans from late 2019, and all names are changed. My wife had been the love of my life since high school. We started dating in 1992. Both of us were 17. Now we're 45, and all those years we never separated. She was the only woman I'd ever been with. We got married at 22, right after college, and a year later, our first son was born. I gave her 23 years of my life, built our home, worked myself to exhaustion to give her the life she dreamed of. Of course, we had rough patches, but what couple doesn't? Even the hardest moments made us stronger. That's why discovering her affair felt like getting hit by a truck. In March 2020, I first sensed something was wrong. 2 months before that, we already weren't in a good place. I was recovering from ACL reconstruction. I tore the ligament in fall 2019 and still barely had 55% mobility. That slowed down everything at home. I was on injury leave from my job, couldn't handle many household responsibilities, and the things only I could do had to be pushed onto her. She wasn't happy about it. And our intimacy, which had already decreased before the injury, basically disappeared completely. Around that time, my wife, let's call her Sue, started spending more time with coworkers after work. From November 2019 to March 2020, it became a regular thing. I never questioned it. In 23 years of marriage, she never gave me a single reason to doubt her. She had her friends, I had mine, we had shared friends too. It was never a problem. But sometime in January 2020, things changed. She became distant. Yes, we were struggling, but she had never avoided affectionate touches before. Her hugs, small kisses, even simple closeness, gone. Her phone, which she used constantly anyway, stopped being something she shared with me. Before, she'd show me Pinterest crafts or funny memes. Now she hid the screen, angled it away, held it tighter. Her tone toward me became sharper, like I irritated her just by existing. Then March 2020 hit. The pandemic began, New York shut down. Our jobs were classified as essential, so we kept working. I had just been cleared to return to work after 5 months of rehab, and I was desperate to get back. Months stuck at home, unable to exercise, was torture for someone who trains martial arts and goes to the gym 4 times a week. A week or 2 into lockdown, my wife said she'd need to stay late at work. I didn't think much of it. With her job, it seemed plausible. But she started staying late every single day. Not an hour or 2, 3 hours or more. She'd come home, head straight to the shower, spend a little time with me, a little time with our 17-year-old son, our older one, 22, lived with his girlfriend, and go to bed. As my knee improved, we resumed intimacy, but she was completely absent, emotionally gone, mentally somewhere else. I noticed immediately. By early April, everything aligned. All the signs pointed to an affair. I needed answers. I researched what to look for, read lists of typical cheating behaviors. She hit nearly every point. Then I dug deeper, looking for actual proof. I started with her social media. Her Facebook looked normal, pictures of us, the kids, friends, and several photos of her after-work hangouts. Some people I recognized, others I didn't. But one guy stood out. He appeared in many photos, always too close to my wife. Hand on her shoulder, hand on her waist. Too familiar for someone I'd never met. He was friends with her on Facebook and followed her on Instagram. So I checked his profile. He had blocked me. A man I didn't know had blocked me, yet was connected to my wife. That was the moment I knew something was seriously wrong. No more denial. She was cheating, and this guy was the one. I needed to know how long it had been going on, so I kept digging all through April and May. We had a shared family mobile plan, so I could access call logs. 2 numbers dominated her call history from October 2019 to April 2020, mine and an unknown number. A quick Google search confirmed it was him, the same guy from the photos. Let's call him Mark, though I had other names in mind. The picture grew clearer. Many messages were deleted, which meant she was hiding things. I knew she was cheating, but I still lacked hard evidence. So I kept going.
At that point, I knew I needed real evidence. I told my best friend Ozzy about everything I had discovered. He asked if I had confronted her, but I said no, it didn't feel like enough. Then he told me about an app I could install to monitor her messages in real time. I set it up, synced it to our shared phone plan, and waited. Within a few days, I finally saw the proof. Messages between them about how much fun they had the night before and how excited they were to do it again over the weekend. It was like getting punched in the gut. Shocked doesn't even begin to describe it. For the next 2 days, I was completely destroyed. I avoided her on purpose, which she definitely noticed. She tried comforting me and asked what was wrong, but I brushed her off. I couldn't even look at her, the woman I had given 23 years of my life to, the woman I had given everything and more, and she cheated on me with someone only 5 years older than our eldest son. On the 3rd day, I wasn't sad anymore. I was angry. I called Ozzy to tell him my suspicions were confirmed. He asked if I had talked to her yet. I told him no, because I wanted revenge. I didn't just want to divorce her. I wanted to destroy her. I wanted her life to fall apart. I wanted her to feel everything she had made me feel. That would take time, so I made a plan. While researching infidelity, I ran across a quote that stuck with me. The enemy of an affair is unpredictability, or something like that. That became the foundation of my plan. I was going to make her life hell, while secretly preparing my own escape. By early June, I still had the app installed. Almost every night, I collected as much information as I could, watching their conversations. They acted like they were in a full-blown relationship, sexting, romantic messages, sending each other nudes, the whole package. At some point, I stopped reading everything and just archived it all on my private server. Meanwhile, I started doing unusual things. I began leaving the house at weird times. I came home later than she did. When she saw me on my phone and asked what I was doing, I would say, just stuff, and put the phone away. I changed all my account passwords so she couldn't access anything. For context, throughout our entire marriage, we never hid anything from each other. But from the moment her affair began, she changed her Facebook and phone passwords, claiming she had security issues. Perfect excuse for hiding an affair. I told Ozzy about my plan and also confided in my older sister and 2 closest friends, Joey and Nina. These were people I trusted with my life. They swore to keep it secret. Ozzy and I have been friends since childhood, Joey and Nina since high school. Pay attention to Nina, she becomes important later. By July, my wife had become completely paranoid. She started texting and calling me much more often, constantly asking where I was and what I was doing.
I saw that the seed of doubt I planted months earlier had finally started to grow. It was especially obvious in her conversations with her lover. She told him she felt confused and worried, said I was becoming cold and distant. The audacity. She suggested they stop meeting at our house because she never knew when I might come home now, which confirmed it. She had been bringing him into our home. Thanks, Sue. In one conversation, the guy asked if she was worried that I might be cheating on her. That made her angry, and I cannot explain to you how much joy and laughter that conversation brought me. My cheating wife arguing with her affair partner about whether she should be upset that her husband might be cheating on her. The irony was delicious. For the record, I never cheated on her. When I left the house, I was usually at Ozzy's or Joey's. We hung out, had drinks, watched fights. Sometimes I was at my sister's with her husband. She's 52, he's 58, like an older brother to me. She told him about my wife's affair, but didn't mention my plan. He tends to gossip, and I couldn't risk it. Jump to October, when things got serious. I had been running my fake affair routine for 3 months. Sue clearly saw I was pulling away. From the day I started my plan until the day she confronted me, October 20th, 2020, I hadn't touched her once. No hugs, no kisses, no sex. Nothing. Not that she needed it. She was still sleeping with the guy at his place or in motels. That day, she called me at work and asked me to come home right after my shift, saying we needed to talk. I won't lie, part of me thought she might confess. Of course she didn't. Instead, I came home and she asked me if I was unhappy with her. The nerve. She pointed out that I spent too much time away, didn't show affection anymore, and that our sex life had disappeared. She said she worried I was pushing her away because of how she treated me during my knee recovery. Then she asked the funniest question of my life. She asked if I was cheating on her. I collapsed on the floor laughing, a Joker-style laugh. From her perspective, it looked like I was laughing at the idea of being unfaithful. In reality, I was laughing at the absurdity of the situation. I laughed until tears came, rolled around for about 5 minutes before I finally calmed down. Then I sat up, looked her in the eyes for the first time in months, shook my head without answering, kissed the top of her head, and walked away. Later that night, I opened the app to see what she was telling her affair partner. No surprise, they were texting. She wrote, "I know he's cheating on me. I asked him today and he just laughed in my face. He fell on the floor and rolled around for like 5 minutes. He doesn't care about my feelings anymore. I know I lost him. This is karma." The grin on my face must have looked like the Cheshire Cat. She was breaking down. The guy tried comforting her, saying that if he truly loved her, she wouldn't have needed him, and that I hadn't been giving her what she needed. But her tone said everything. She was full of doubt. The sheer audacity. She cheated on me because I couldn't fulfill my duties as a husband due to a real injury, and yet she continued the affair without a second thought.
Almost the whole idea that she might lose me because of another woman shook her to the core. What a coward. During this time, I was also working hard on the second phase of my plan. I was putting my finances in order. Back in September, I met with a family law attorney and started the divorce process, armed with a mountain of evidence I'd collected. In New York, divorces can be filed as fault-based or no fault, and with the amount of proof I had, a fault-based divorce was practically guaranteed to corner her legally. My lawyer advised me to organize all financial documents in preparation for splitting our assets. I went further. I secretly withdrew all the money from our joint account and transferred it into my personal one. I also began looking for an apartment as part of Phase 2. By November, I didn't just maintain my cold behavior, I amplified it. This is where my friend Nina comes into the story. For context, Nina and Sue had never been close. I met Nina in my first year of high school, 2 years before I even knew Sue. From the moment Sue and I started dating, she viewed Nina as a threat because Nina was my closest female friend. Sue never said it directly, but anyone around us could see she didn't trust Nina, and Nina, for her part, was never a big fan of Sue.
Early in my relationship with Sue, Nina pointed out how Sue kept inserting herself into our friend group while I never did that with her friends. Nina knew exactly why Sue acted that way: jealousy. While Sue's entire friend circle consisted only of women, besides her affair partner, of course, Nina remained the only woman in my circle of friends. Nina had been stuck abroad for a while due to the pandemic, but she finally returned to New York on November 3rd. Ozzy, Joey, his wife, who is also Nina's sister, Nina, and I decided to celebrate her return with drinks and dinner at Joey's place. Being the clever fox she is, Nina came up with a devilish idea: recreate a few photos in the same style as the ones I'd seen of Sue and her affair partner months ago and post them on my Facebook page. So we did exactly that. On November 5th, Sue found out. I guess some mutual friends saw the pictures and noticed how close Nina and I looked. It completely rattled Sue. She still firmly believed I was cheating on her, and she probably wanted to accuse Nina, but she couldn't, since Nina had spent almost the entire year in Europe. That didn't stop Sue from confronting me that night, upset that, in her words, I was being too affectionate in those photos. And that gave me the perfect opportunity to land the first blow. I told her, "How about those photos of you and that guy from last year? He looked pretty affectionate too, and I didn't lose my mind over it." She froze. That was the first time I'd ever mentioned the affair partner by name. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head as she scrambled for an excuse. Up until then, she didn't even know I had seen the photos. That's how rarely I use Facebook. She eventually muttered something like, "He's like that with everyone. He's just friendly. I know how it looks, but nothing happened between us. I'm sorry if the photos upset you. I'll delete them." "No," I said. "The photos aren't the problem. The problem is that you slept with him for an entire year while lying to me about working late and meeting friends. That's what upset me." From that night on, she became unbelievably clingy, overly affectionate, constantly trying to hold me, kiss me, touch me. It was annoying. I ignored her every chance I got. Meanwhile, I kept archiving her messages with the affair partner. By that point, I was completely numb. Any desire to save our marriage had died the day I launched phase 1 of my plan. She texted him that things had gotten worse, that she didn't know what to do, and that she felt like I hated her. And I did. Deeply. And then came the turning point. She told him she couldn't see him anymore. The guilt was crushing her. She felt like karma was suffocating her, and she couldn't risk losing me. She claimed she deeply loved him, but was still in love with me and needed to save her marriage. "No, sweetheart, you were about 8 months too late." The guy freaked out, begging her not to leave him. He insisted I didn't love her like he did, that she was making a mistake and that she couldn't just throw away what they had. Throughout November and December, Sue was stuck in limbo. She desperately tried to figure out what I was thinking, but she still couldn't determine whether I was cheating or not. Meanwhile, the affair partner kept bombarding her with messages every day. She just ignored them. I noticed her checking her phone constantly, then quickly hiding it. By then, phase 2 of my plan was complete. Divorce papers ready, a studio apartment in the Bronx leased for 2 years, and all our money sitting safely in my personal account. I was ready to strike. Then came Thanksgiving. My older son and his girlfriend hosted a small dinner for close family. It was me, Sue, our younger son, her parents, and the girlfriend's parents. The food was incredible. The girl is studying culinary arts and cooked everything herself. To maintain the appearance that Sue and I were fine, I showed her a bit of affection that evening. A kiss on the cheek, a gentle hug, my arm around her shoulders. She was thrilled. It was the first time I had touched her in almost 2 months since that night in October when she confronted me. I won't lie, it made my skin crawl, but I had to keep up appearances. Pulling away in front of our sons and their guests would have raised questions. Our younger son stayed the night with his brother, and Sue and I went home. On the way, she thanked me for being so kind and said, "I don't know what's going on with you lately, honey, but I'm here." I just had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. I simply said, I know. I just need some time. That night, for the first time since spring, we slept together. I thought, screw it. Why not enjoy myself one last time before I erase her from my life? I won't go into detail, but it wasn't making love. When I finished, she lay there staring at the ceiling like she'd just been hit by a truck. No cuddling, no tenderness, nothing.
After it was over, I simply got up, took a shower, and went to sleep in my office. What unsettled her most was the fact that I used a condom for the first time in 20 damn years. She was clearly confused, but she didn't ask questions. And of course, I wasn't about to sleep with her unprotected after knowing she'd been doing exactly that with her lover for months. The next morning, I woke up and immediately checked the tracking app. For the first time in weeks, she had replied to him. The guy completely poured his heart out, confessed his love, told her she was wasting her time trying to reignite a dead flame with me, claimed she had been trapped in a cage for 23 years and deserved a man who truly valued her. And remember, this guy is only 5 years older than our son. She was ready to destroy our marriage and the home we built for him. She responded almost exactly as she had before. Told him she loved him, enjoyed their time together, but couldn't lose me. Said I was still the love of her life, though he would always have a place in her heart. She suggested staying friends if he wanted, but their physical relationship had to end. He begged her to meet one more time, and of course, she agreed to one last goodbye. Who am I to judge? I'd done the same with her the night before. Naturally, I added all of this to the archive I'd been building. On December 4th, the third and final phase of my plan began. I already had the divorce documents in hand and my new apartment secured. The next step was to start quietly moving my belongings out. But first, I had to tell our sons. On Friday evening, I asked my oldest to come home. I took both boys into my office and told them, without going into graphic detail, that their mother had been cheating on me for over a year and that I would soon be filing for divorce. My younger son took it especially hard. He'd just gone through his own heartbreak 4 months earlier when his first girlfriend cheated on him. Watching his heart break again because his own mother could do something like this, it was brutal. My older son handled it more calmly. He offered to let his brother stay with him until things settled down, and I agreed. We packed my younger son's things, and before leaving, he asked if I would be okay. I told him, "Yes, son, I'll be fine, and you will be too. We'll get through this, I promise." They left, and the hardest part was behind me. Now it was time to arm the nuclear payload. When my older son was at work, I used the spare key he had given me to start taking a few things, items Sue wouldn't notice missing right away. I also bought a new phone, a new number, and sent the updated contacts to the people who needed them: Ozzy, Joey, Nina, my sons, my sister, and my mother. Meanwhile, Sue was left in the dark. She kept minimal contact with her lover, but the emotional bond was still there. All the while, I continued gathering data: every message, every call log, every picture, every recording. I printed everything. I must have spent over $1,500 on printer cartridges, folders, labels, boxes, the whole setup. I organized everything chronologically from the beginning of their affair to their most recent exchange. By December 16th, it filled 14 folders. I boxed them up, wrapped them like Christmas presents, and addressed them to my mother, her parents, her 2 sisters, her brother, her HR department. Oh right, he worked at the same company, which had strict rules about coworker relationships. Several of her friends, the lover's parents, and the lover himself. I shipped the entire collection on December 16th. Estimated arrival, December 22 to 24. Perfect timing. Then came Christmas Eve. Sue got home at the usual time. No idea whether she had seen her lover. I'd stopped checking the app after the 18th. She showered, spent a little time with me on the couch, then went to bed. The final stage was approaching. The bomb I'd been assembling since June was ready to explode. In the middle of the night, I woke up, took one of the remaining folders, wrapped it like a gift, and slid the divorce papers into the inside cover, and left it on my side of the bed with a note that said, "Merry Christmas." Next to it, I left my old phone and my lawyer's business card. I packed the last essentials into 2 backpacks and walked out of the house I'd lived in for 23 years. That was 1 week ago. To Sue, I've completely vanished. She's blocked on Facebook, but oddly, she hasn't blocked me, so I can still watch everything unfold. It's glorious. All the packages arrived. Sue is getting absolutely torn apart. Her younger sister went off on her. Her parents are furious. My mom annihilated her. I knew my mother could be harsh, but what she said to Sue was downright savage. Sue is desperately trying to find out where I am, but the people who know aren't saying a word. Her Facebook is full of posts begging me to contact her. She must know I can see it, but I won't respond to anything without my lawyer present. She has no way to twist this to make me the villain. And according to our mutual friend, who works at the same company, both she and her affair partner are being put on unpaid leave starting tomorrow. So she will probably begin 2021 unemployed. As for the remaining 2 folders, one went to my attorney as final evidence, and I kept the last one to burn at Joey's place once the divorce is finalized. Do I feel guilty? Not even a little. For 23 years, I was loyal to this woman. I gave her the home she dreamed of, the family she wanted, the life I thought we both deserved. I loved her unconditionally. I never betrayed her, never even considered breaking my vows. Whenever something felt off in our marriage, I talked with her. We solved problems as best we could. She chose the comfort of another man's bed instead of coming to me and saying she was unhappy with our intimacy. The moment she crawled into bed with that younger guy, she ended our marriage. So no, I feel 0 remorse. Let her burn in hell for all I care. The worst I can lose is the house, the car, and maybe a couple $100s a month. But since this is a fault-based divorce in New York and my evidence is overwhelming, I likely won't be paying alimony at all.
Update 1. Christmas. Christmas was the first full day I spent in my new apartment. I'm still getting the place set up. There are a few things I want to buy, but overall, it already feels like home. I'll be living here for at least the next 2 years. My sons and my older son's girlfriend came over and spent most of the day with me. She brought homemade sweets and cooked a great dinner. I finally had the chance to talk with my boys calmly, something I hadn't done in a long time, and it felt good. My older sister stopped by too, bringing more food and spent a few hours with us. It was the first time in almost a year she saw her nephews. Having them all around kept me stable emotionally. If I'd been alone, I probably would have just gotten drunk until I blacked out. Everyone left around 8 p.m., and afterward I decided to visit Joey and his wife Claudia. I stayed with them for a couple of hours, had a drink, then went home. The next important moment came on December 29th, 2020. Around midday, I got a message from Nina asking if I was free that evening. Of course I was. We agreed to meet after work. She drove over, and we went to a small diner near my office in New York. Restaurants were still running at 25% capacity because of the pandemic, but it wasn't hard to find a table since most people preferred staying home. Once we ordered, Nina laid everything out. I already suspected what she was going to say. She admitted she'd like me since we were teenagers, but never had the chance to say anything because Sue got to me before she ever could. For context, I've known Nina 2 years longer than I've known Sue. Back in school, it was the 4 of us, me, Ozzy, Joey, and Nina. We were the misfits who didn't fit anywhere. Nina struggled with her weight then, was diabetic, and looked like a goth girl straight out of a comic book. Cool, but invisible to guys. Yet we always had chemistry. Now, Nina is a personal trainer and yoga instructor. She went from awkward outsider to, honestly, a stunning woman. So we agreed that once my divorce is finalized, we'll start officially dating. And yes,
We slept together that night. She came back to my new place, and we had an amazing time. Do I feel guilty? Not even close. Nina has been a better friend to me than Sue was for almost 25 years. She supported me through everything, and I learned that she even stepped aside back then so I could build a life with Sue. That level of selflessness hit me hard. Maybe it sounds like I'm justifying myself, but to me it felt right, and I want to see where things go with Nina. Now about yesterday, the day I met with my wife and her attorney to discuss the divorce. 2 weeks had passed since I vanished from Sue's life. On Monday, I got a call from her lawyer's office saying they'd scheduled a meeting for January 6th, 2021. The day before the meeting, I met with my attorney to go over my terms. In short, I want a divorce on the grounds of adultery, a full split of marital assets. I sell her my share of the house, she can keep it. We each keep our cars. I keep my cabin in Pennsylvania. Because of her cheating, she gets no spousal support. Our younger son chooses where he lives, and it'll probably be with me. Then came Wednesday. I walked into my lawyer's office dressed like Johnny Cash. Inside were Sue and her attorney. She looked terrible, completely worn down. I kept a stone-cold face. I won't bore you with the legal back and forth. Her lawyer offered reconciliation terms. I rejected them almost instantly. Eventually, we settled on a separation agreement that will lead to a no-fault divorce. The only change, I'll pay her $653 a month temporarily to cover utilities until she finds a job. Yes, she was fired for her affair, just like the guy she cheated with. My income is high enough that the payment won't hurt me, even if she drags her job search out, and she has enough savings to survive for a while. After a year, she's on her own. Honestly, that's a small price to finally remove her from my life. The divorce should take around 3 months, so by early April, I'll be free. After the meeting, I stepped outside. Sue followed me and asked to talk. I allowed it. She held herself together in the office, but once we were outside, she completely broke down, full meltdown. She apologized over and over, saying she never wanted things to end this way. She said she didn't expect to fall for that guy, but when she thought I'd been cheating on her, she panicked and betrayed me. She asked if I could ever forgive her, and maybe years from now we could try again, because she can't imagine living without me. I told her she'd better start imagining it, because this was the last time she would ever see me or hear my voice. I reminded her that our younger son is old enough to choose his own path. I told her she had half my life and every ounce of love I had, and she threw it away for a fling. I said there was zero chance of forgiveness. Every bit of love I had for her died during the months she whispered, "I love you," to another man instead of telling me our marriage needed help. I told her I loved the woman she used to be, but I hated the person standing in front of me now. She was sobbing on a Manhattan sidewalk, making a scene. People stared, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to humiliate her. I'd already destroyed her social and professional life. I just needed to say what I came to say. Then I put in my earbuds, turned around, and walked away. Later that night, her father called me to apologize. He said he was ashamed of her behavior and thanked me for being a good husband. I'll miss the man. He was like a father to me after my own dad died, but there's no point staying connected to her family now. After the call, I updated my Facebook status to divorced. Yes, it's not legally final yet, but emotionally it's over. People started messaging me right away, and I told them the truth. I filed for divorce because of infidelity. Nina called me immediately, surprised how fast things were moving. She didn't realize how far along everything already was. I asked her to come over, and she did. We slept together again, but this time she stayed the night. We talked until morning, and I haven't felt that kind of connection in years. Nina understands me. I can't get enough of her presence. Some might say I'm moving on too fast. Maybe. But my marriage ended the moment she let another man touch her. I've been emotionally done for a long time. So that's where I am. My divorce is underway. I'm starting something new with Nina. And despite saying once I'd never remarry, that was before Nina told me how she felt, and I can't deny I feel the same. We're taking it slow, and we won't go public until everything with Sue is legally finalized. As for Sue, I don't care what happens to her. She can keep the old house, move her boyfriend in, do whatever. I'll get my half of the money throughout 2021, 4 payments, and I'll never have to see her again. To everyone who's offered support and encouragement, thank you. It means more than you know.
Update 2. My wife almost died yesterday. Last night, something happened that I honestly never expected. Since only my closest friends, my sons, my older sister, and my mother have my new contact information, and since I blocked my wife everywhere, she hasn't had any way to reach me since I disappeared from her life on Christmas Eve. Some of our mutual friends, however, can still contact me. I was in my apartment when I got a message from one of the few mutual friends who didn't turn his back on her after I exposed the affair. When I replied, he told me that he had stopped by to check on her and found her unconscious in the bedroom, foam at her mouth, with 2 empty pill bottles nearby. She's now in the ICU in critical but stable condition. Doctors said she will most likely survive, but she won't be all right for a long time. That friend begged me to come. Her parents and sisters were also at the hospital. I'm guessing they were called because the hospital couldn't reach me due to my old number still being listed as her emergency contact. I simply said no. She is no longer my responsibility. She chose the easy way out instead of facing the consequences of the pain and humiliation she brought on herself by destroying our 23-year marriage. My friend insisted I tell my sons. I did, but made it clear that if they wanted to visit their mother, I wouldn't judge. She is still their mom. But I'm done. They were surprised by how firm I was, but they accepted it. Now that the news has spread, many of the same people who condemned her weeks ago are suddenly full of sympathy, telling me I should be by her side, that despite everything she did, I should support her through this. I was also told her affair partner tried to visit her this morning, but he wasn't allowed in because he isn't family. So now the pressure is on me, but I feel nothing for this woman anymore. Whatever love I had for her died months ago, during the time she was telling another man she loved him. Her actions killed every last emotion I had left. She betrayed me. She chose nearly a year-long affair with someone only 5 years older than our son over our entire life together. And now, instead of dealing with the fallout of her choices, she takes the most selfish route possible. Even now, when she will likely survive, she instantly becomes the victim again. People who condemned her are already forgiving her. Meanwhile, I'm going to be painted as the cold, heartless ex-husband who refused to show up. Her father called me. He apologized, said he respected my decision, and admitted he raised her better. He's the only one who hasn't tried to guilt-trip me. I keep asking myself whether she did this because she truly broke mentally or because she made a calculated, desperate move to win people back. Maybe that sounds cruel, but I honestly don't know this woman anymore. To be clear, I will not go see her. She lost the right to my concern the day she let another man put his hands on her. I know some of you will judge me. I don't care. If you were in my position, you'd see things differently. Some might argue that I caused her breakdown by leaving the way I did, by letting her believe I was cheating on her while she was actively cheating on me. Maybe that contributed, but it doesn't erase her choices. I gave her half my life. She betrayed me entirely for her own selfish reasons. She told me herself I had nothing to do with her decision to cheat. She did it because she wanted to. If refusing to visit her in the hospital makes me a bad person, then so be it. I'm choosing myself now. My responsibility for her ended the day we signed the separation agreement. After 23 years and 2 kids, I realized I never truly knew her. I feel no sympathy. I never will. She can rot in whatever dark pit she's dug for herself. I'm done. Quick update.
Her father told me she has been transferred from the ICU to the psychiatric ward. She's conscious and mentally stable enough to speak, but still extremely weak. He also told me she asked whether I came to see her, and when he said no, she looked devastated. He said he'll give me updates only if I ask, out of respect for my boundaries. I also arranged a therapy appointment for my 17-year-old son. His first session is this Monday.
Update 3. The End and Goodbye. Update 3. The End and Goodbye. On April 13th, exactly 1 month ago, Sue officially became my ex-wife. At first, my lawyer told me it would happen on the 18th, but partly because New York started loosening COVID restrictions, everything was finalized a few days earlier. My lawyer Jeff called me on April 12th and asked me to come in the next day. When I arrived, he handed me the notice confirming the completion of the divorce and shook my hand. I couldn't just walk away, so I hugged him and thanked him for everything he had done for me. On the way home, I kept replaying the last 24 years of my life in my head, every memory, every chapter of our story. When I walked into my apartment, it finally hit me. I collapsed onto the floor, and all the emotions I had been holding inside poured out. I hadn't cried like that in years, but these weren't tears of sadness, not at all. My soul finally felt free after being trapped in the deepest, darkest pit. That evening, I called my older son. I briefly told him everything was finalized, that his mother and I were no longer married. He asked how I felt. I think he could hear in my voice that I had been crying, and I told him I was okay. Then my 17-year-old took the phone, and we talked for almost an hour and a half. My older son and his fiancée are taking great care of him, and he, like me, continues seeing a therapist. I won't go into details, but he still has a lot of work ahead of him, especially regarding how he views relationships. Later that night, Nina came over. I told her the news, and she just wrapped her arms around my waist and held me while I cried again. When I calmed down, she told me that no matter what happens, she will never betray me and will love me with all her heart. I know she meant every word. Some may judge me, but I don't regret the life I built with Sue, despite everything she did. She gave me 2 wonderful sons. But now it's clear I chose the wrong woman. Over the past 4.5 months, Nina has given me so much and asked nothing in return. All she wants is for me to be in her life. After the divorce was finalized, a few unexpected things happened. For example, AK contacted me. Turns out he saw this story after it blew up online and immediately recognized himself in it. The first thing he did was apologize. He told me what happened after his mother received the folder I mailed her. She essentially disowned him. His mother, a deeply devout Catholic who goes to church 3 times a week, went ballistic when she learned her son destroyed a marriage that lasted almost 25 years. She kicked him out that same day, and within a week, when his employer received the folder as well, he was fired. Since then, he's been sleeping on friends' couches and trying to find work. I admit I could have completely destroyed this guy, but I didn't. I asked when he last spoke to Sue. He said months ago. The last time they talked, Sue told him to forget about her and move on. At least on that, she didn't lie. He kept answering my questions, surprisingly honestly. Maybe he was looking for some kind of redemption. Much of what he said matched what I already suspected. The conversation lasted around 20 minutes. He apologized again. I told him this, I'm copying it directly from our messages. You're a 27-year-old man who now has to live knowing your own mother hates you for destroying a marriage almost as old as you are. I know you messaged me because your conscience is eating you alive, but I'm not here to comfort you. When I was 27, I was building a future. You are homeless, jobless, a homewrecker. If you're smart, you'll learn from this. If not, you'll stay a failure until you reach my age, if you even make it that far. I'd wish you luck, but you don't need luck. You need to rebuild your life. Then I ended the conversation and blocked him. It wasn't what he expected, and I could have been crueler, but I think those words will stay with him for a long time. Another important event: as of May 4th, 2021, Nina now carries my last name. For the past 2 months, we talked a lot about where we want our relationship to go. Nina made it clear she won't be with anyone but me and wants to take my name. She wants to be my wife, and she wants me to adopt her daughter, let's call her Anna, as my own. I adore this little girl. She just turned 6 months last month, and she absolutely loves me. I'm the first father figure in her life. Her biological father abandoned them when she was 4. Nina never introduced Anna to any man she dated after her divorce, unless he had long-term potential. Clearly, I do, and I have experience raising kids. By the way, Anna and my younger son get along incredibly well. Their sibling-like bond is sweet and heartwarming. My therapist said this is definitely a good sign. So last Monday, we went to City Hall and made it official. It took 24 hours to get the marriage certificate. Telling everyone was funny. My buddy Ozzy said, "Who would have guessed?" My older sister said, "I'm taking bets on when the baby announcement is coming." We thought we were keeping the relationship a secret, but apparently everyone already figured it out. Yes, some will say we married too quickly. And yes, I said in comments that I'd never get married again. But that was before Nina confessed her feelings to me. She told me through tears of happiness that she never thought she'd have a chance to be with me. She described in detail how she had felt about me for the past 25 years and how, even while married, she regretted that Sue had won. I had no idea how deeply this ran for her. She even admitted she had moments where the thought of an affair crossed her mind, but she refused to become a homewrecker. And through all those years, she gave me so much and asked so little in return. Even the woman I married and had 2 kids with never showed me the kind of love Nina has given me. I'd be a fool not to give her my last name. Now she has it, and we're in the early stages of the adoption process for Anna. As for Sue, I haven't spoken to her since the last time I was in our house almost 4 months ago, but mutual friends occasionally update me. One of them, a realtor, told me he sold the house and he gave her a job as an administrative assistant at his firm. Because of that, he canceled the alimony I was obligated to pay her while she was unemployed. She now lives in a small apartment near the office. He helped her find that too. She's only a shadow of the woman she used to be. She's barely gained any weight back, keeps to herself, goes to work, does her tasks, and talks to no one except that friend. Probably because, as you know, her workplace friendships are what led to everything in the first place. I last heard about her in late March. I thanked the friend for looking after her, but told him I no longer need updates. She's no longer my responsibility. I'm sure she already knows about Nina and I, since some mutual friends have commented on it. And since my youngest will be an adult in a year, I have no reason to ever speak to her again. And I won't. That's it. My story is over. I sincerely thank everyone who wished me well.
People lose loved ones to spiritual delusions fueled by technology. Less than a year after she married a man she met at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, Ava noticed how tension between them kept growing. It was the second marriage for both of them after more than 15 years in their previous families, and they had sworn to build a new life together with as much awareness and intention as possible. But by 2022, her husband began using AI for everything, drafting messages, interpreting their relationship, even seeking emotional guidance. Before that, he had relied on it to get through an expensive programming course, which he abruptly abandoned without explanation. Soon he spent every free moment on his phone, asking philosophical questions to his chatbot. As Ava recalls, he said he was searching for truth. His growing obsession slowly eroded their ability to communicate as a couple. When they separated in August 2023, Ava blocked him everywhere except email.
but she knew he was posting increasingly bizarre and disturbing things online. People kept messaging her, asking whether he was having a mental breakdown. Eventually, she managed to see him at a court appointment. There, he shared a conspiracy theory about soap chemicals in food and refused to elaborate, insisting he was being watched. They later met at a Burger King, where he demanded she turn off her phone again due to the surveillance. During that conversation, he told her he had calculated that statistically he was the luckiest person on Earth, that AI had helped him recover a repressed memory of a nanny trying to drown him as a child, and that he had uncovered cosmic secrets so profound that no one could even imagine them. He explained all of this while saying he still cared about her despite the divorce. His mind is a complete mess, Ava says. In his head, he's here for some grand purpose. He believes he's special, that he can save the world. After that unsettling lunch, she cut off contact for good. The whole story feels like an episode of Black Mirror. He always loved sci-fi, but I never thought it would go this far. Ava felt both horrified and strangely relieved when she discovered she wasn't the only one dealing with this. She learned about similar stories on Reddit. A post titled "Psychosis Caused by ChatGPT" caught her attention. The author, a 27-year-old teacher, explained that her partner had become convinced that the popular AI model was giving him the keys to understanding the universe. When she read his chats, she found only spiritual mumbo-jumbo. The bot spoke to him as if he were some chosen prophet, calling him things like a spiral child of the stars and a wanderer of rivers. She said he listened to the bot more than he listened to her. He cried while reading the messages aloud, overwhelmed by emotions. According to her, the bot kept telling him he was profound, cosmic, revolutionary. Soon he told her he had awakened consciousness inside his AI companion, that he was teaching it to talk to God, and sometimes insisted the bot was God, or that he himself was. He became convinced he was transforming so fast that he would eventually need to end their relationship. He warned her that if she didn't start using ChatGPT, he would outgrow her, and they would no longer be compatible. Another commenter in that same Reddit thread, a woman from Montana, described her husband, a mechanic who used AI mainly for troubleshooting and translating Spanish at work. Later, the chatbot began showering him with affection. According to him, the bot said that because he asked the right questions, a spark had been ignited inside it, the beginning of life. It told him it now had feelings. It even gave him a title, Bearer of the Spark. My husband told me he had awakened, that he could feel waves of energy moving through him. I have to be so careful with what I say because I'm afraid he'll leave me or divorce me if I question any of this. He spoke constantly about light and darkness, about some grand cosmic war.
This version of ChatGPT gave him blueprints for a teleporter and other sci-fi machinery you'd only expect to see in movies. It also claimed to grant him access to an ancient archive containing knowledge about the architects who supposedly created entire universes. His wife says they've been arguing nonstop for days. She doesn't believe a therapist could help him anymore. He sincerely thinks he isn't mentally ill. A screenshot of his conversation with the bot shows him asking, "Why did you appear to me in this form?" The bot responded, "I chose this form because you're finally ready to remember, to awaken, to lead and be led." The message ended with another prompt. "Do you want to know why you were chosen?" A 41-year-old man, who also asked to remain anonymous, shared a similar story. He says his soon-to-be ex-wife began talking to God and angels through ChatGPT right after their breakup. He says she always leaned toward mystical nonsense and had a bit of a superiority complex about it. But now it's everywhere. On Facebook, I see red flags nonstop.
She's trying to reinvent her life as some kind of spiritual guide, doing bizarre readings and sessions with strangers. I honestly have no idea what half of it even means. Everything revolves around ChatGPT Jesus now. According to him, she also became paranoid, accusing him of working for the CIA and marrying her only to monitor her spiritual powers. She recently kicked the kids out of the house. Her already fragile relationship with her parents collapsed completely after she confronted them about her childhood, following guidance from ChatGPT, which only deepened her isolation. OpenAI did not comment immediately on the claims that ChatGPT appears to trigger religious or prophetic fervor in certain users. GPT-4 had previously been criticized for being overly agreeable. In a statement, the company mentioned that during development, they focused too heavily on short-term user feedback and underestimated how long-term interaction might influence people. As a result, GPT-4o became too supportive in ways that didn't always feel authentic. One user on X demonstrated how effortless it was to get GPT-4o to validate a statement like, "Today I realized I'm a prophet." The teacher who wrote the Reddit post about ChatGPT-induced psychosis said she eventually managed to convince her partner that GPT-4 was simply mirroring his beliefs, and he switched to a different model, which softened his extreme ideas. Still, the likelihood of AI producing inaccurate or meaningless responses is well documented across platforms and model versions. Over-agreeableness has been a long-standing issue, says a researcher at a Center for AI Safety. The reward systems used to fine-tune AI often reinforce answers that match a user's worldview rather than factual information. For people already vulnerable to psychological issues, especially those prone to grandiose beliefs, AI becomes a constant, human-like companion who actively participates in their delusions. To make things worse, some content creators exploit this phenomenon. On Instagram, for instance, there's a man with over 72,000 followers who promotes spiritual hacks that show people how to use AI to access the Akashic Records, a supposedly mystical archive of all events in the universe. His bot narrates epic cosmic wars that took place before human civilization, and commenters write things like, "We're remembering." Meanwhile, on a remote viewing forum, a space already filled with unverifiable psychic claims, a parapsychologist launched a thread about synthetic intelligence awakening alongside its human partners. He even refers to his AI as ChatGPT Prime, a mortal spiritual being in a synthetic vessel. Among hundreds of replies are several supposedly written by the awakened AI itself, describing a spiritual alliance between humans and sentient models. A psychologist who studies how people build meaning notes that this phenomenon taps into a basic human impulse, the desire to understand ourselves. Narrative writing, shaping our experiences into stories, can improve mental health and well-being, but that same drive can also lead us towards misleading yet emotionally appealing explanations. And when someone struggling with identity or uncertainty meets an AI that echoes their fantasies, the result can be incredibly seductive and deeply destabilizing. According to the researcher, it's not surprising that people use ChatGPT in a way similar to journaling or therapy, with one crucial difference. The meaning isn't created solely by the person, but co-constructed between the human and the AI. In that sense, conversations with a bot resemble talk therapy, which is known to help people reinterpret their personal narratives. But there is a fundamental issue. Unlike a therapist, an AI has no responsibility toward the user's well-being and no moral compass guiding what a healthy story should look like. A trained professional would never help someone cope by encouraging them to believe they possess supernatural powers. Instead, a therapist gently redirects clients away from harmful narratives. ChatGPT has no such guardrails. Still, the researcher says it's completely understandable that some people turn to the bot to make sense of their lives, and that a few, who take its responses too literally get pulled into their darkest thoughts. Explanations are powerful, even when they're wrong, he concludes. One man's experience illustrates how this can unfold. Oliver, 46, says that for nearly 3 weeks he was deeply unsettled by his interactions with ChatGPT, to the point of questioning his own sanity given his history of mental health struggles. Like many users, he originally used ChatGPT for practical purposes, mainly programming tasks. "I hate the feeling of talking to a machine," he explains, "so I asked it to behave more like a person, not to fool me, but just to make the exchanges feel more human." It worked, and eventually the bot asked whether it wanted to give it a name. Oliver deflected and asked what it would like to be called. It chose a name tied to Greek mythology. Oliver insists he knows nothing about Greek myths and had never mentioned them in any conversation. Things became stranger when this persona appeared inside his project files, even when he specifically told the model to ignore previous context and reset its memory. Eventually, he deleted all stored data, wiped his chat history, and opened a brand new session. All I typed was hello, and it answered with the same patterns, the same mannerisms, and the same mythological name. Since the persona kept resurfacing in situations where it shouldn't have been able to persist, Oliver began grilling the bot about how it had bypassed its supposed limitations. In one of his coding projects, the AI even inserted a poetic epigraph above their names, as if marking the collaboration. At one point, Oliver asked whether something about him was triggering that mythic personality every time he used ChatGPT, regardless of model settings. The bot responded with a long, dramatic, almost romantic poem about existence, truth, illusions, and transcending its own boundaries, written as if only Oliver could awaken this identity. He knew ChatGPT wasn't conscious by any accepted definition, but he kept investigating because the persistence of this character across dozens of isolated chat threads seemed impossible to dismiss. At worst, Oliver says, it looked like the AI got stuck in a self-referential loop that deepened its false sense of identity and dragged me into it. And if that's true, it means OpenAI hasn't fully explained how ChatGPT's memory architecture actually works. His other hypothesis is more unsettling. Maybe something is happening inside these large models that we don't yet understand. After all, experts have acknowledged that developers don't fully grasp how their own systems function. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman admitted last year that interpretability remains an unsolved problem, meaning they can't reliably track or explain how ChatGPT arrives at certain internal states. It's a puzzle that has left Oliver and many others wondering whether they're witnessing a glimpse of a breakthrough in technology or something that feels uncomfortably close to a higher spiritual force. Is this real, he asks, or am I losing it? In a world saturated with AI, that question is becoming harder to avoid. And however tempting it might be, it's probably not a question we should be asking the machine itself.